secrets to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no coal. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks. From the mountains of Kentucky to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. Today, we are talking to campus workers at Jacksonville State University about their campaign for a living wage. We're also taking a look at the latest updates on the Mercedes Union Drive in Vance, Alabama. And we are going to be analyzing the case that some people are making on Twitter that teachers have it too good in the state of Alabama. All that and more on today's program. If you've got anything to add, you want to call in, the phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave a voicemail throughout the week, and we might respond on the next show. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online. Particularly at our website, TVLR.fm. You can subscribe to our newsletters there. You will get in your inbox every single week. Last Week in Southern Labor, where we take a look at what workers are up to in the U.S. South and the American colonies, and Boss Watch, again, in your email inbox every week if you subscribe. Just a reminder, support from listeners helps us stay on the air. Donations can be made at tvlr.fm/donate. Those donations can be made in a one-time fashion or as a monthly recurring contribution. Hats can also be purchased at tvlr.fm/store. Those are in-house, so we will be shipping them pretty quickly after they're ordered. Those hats are really good. There are logo caps, Union and USA made, obviously. If you want to support the show, you can also become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. And if you're a member of a union, your union can sponsor the program to help us stay on the air. Your union, your regional council, or international union. All of those, we have sponsors from all of those varieties, and it is all important and necessary to keep us on the air.
That's right. That's right. Let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you are on YouTube, Facebook, Unclaimed Mysteries Internet Radio, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WMMT, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check that out. And as most of you know, we are not media professionals, just a couple union activists who really want to put Alabama's movement and the South's labor movement, with a bigger space, a bigger platform, have a bigger voice. We're hoping we can make a difference on that front. Can't do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in, whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener. We appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Absolutely. Appreciate everybody in the chat. We've already got 15 people just watching us on YouTube after just a couple of minutes being live. If you haven't liked the stream yet, please do, as well as subscribing to the channel. Appreciate everybody in the chat, including Reese, who I mistook for Reese Murtaugh, who's running for election of the Railroad Division of the Machinists Union. That rerun election happened yesterday, so looking looking forward to seeing those votes counted and relaying the results of that race to you. Could be very consequential as the rail unions begin their negotiations sometime in the next year for the next round of contract negotiations. Also appreciate Tempest Lord Rayhan for tuning in and chatting with us from the Houston IWW. Chewy from UAW Local 387, hello. And Leanne says good morning. Jacob says, not me, another Jacob, chilling in New Orleans and listening to TVLR. If you're in New Orleans, you could actually listen to us on the radio. You could have listened to us on the radio at 5 a.m. on 102.3 WHIV. So that's when we're on the radio in New Orleans. 5 a.m. every Saturday morning, 102.3. Also want to just take a moment of personal privilege to say if anybody has any tattoo recommendations. I'm in the market for a tattoo, been looking for a tattoo, so need a good tattoo artist and some good tattoo like art recommendations. I still don't know, like I want a tattoo, I don't know what I want to get yet. So, you know, if there's
holler at me and my folks. We know some artists that are pretty good.
Okay.
So yeah.
Good deal. I'll have to do that. If anybody else has any recommendations, let me know. Reese on in the chat says, "Is that a week late on the radio since that's before filming?" Indeed, it is. Yes, it's the what we do with our syndication is we're live, you know, right now. If you're listening to us Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m., we are live, and then we take the recording of that program and send it to the various stations for playing at various times. So we are on the radio at 11 a.m. in Muscle Shoals on Tuesdays, at, when is it, 1:30 on Wednesdays and Saturdays in Whitesburg, and then, like I said, 5 a.m. in New Orleans. So various times, and you know, you're going to want to get with your local affiliate to see when we're on, when we're on in your area.
And if you have a local affiliate that does not currently air the Valley Labor Report,
yeah,
they should.
Know. They should. Yeah, absolutely. Justin on Facebook, love your work. Keep up the fight. USW 13-1. Appreciate it. So, and we got another one in the chat. Teamster 705 Chicago, UPS. Very cool. Very cool. Appreciate everybody tuning in, letting us know what unions you're from. So here's what workers in the U.S. South and the American colonies were up to from April 26th to May the 3rd. In new union campaigns, UAB football players have unanimously joined Athletes.org, an organization seeking to be one of a number representing college football players as a saga to unionize the industry unfolds. They are the first group of college football players to openly engage in such an effort. The employer filed a petition to hold a union election after a majority of the 47 workers at Imperial Bag and Paper Company in Orlando, Florida, demonstrated support for unionization with the Teamsters, Local 385. 10 security guards at Allied Universal in Washington, D.C. filed a petition to hold a union election with the United Government Security Officers of America, Local 259. Workers likely pushed by their employer filed a petition to decertify the American Federation of Teachers, Local 420, as the union representing 43 workers at KIPP St. Louis High School in St. Louis, Missouri. 25 workers at Starbucks in Tampa, Florida, filed a petition to hold a union election with Starbucks Workers United, as did 15 more workers at a Starbucks in Little Rock, Arkansas. Workers likely pushed by their employer filed a petition to decertify the Office and Professional Employees International Union, OPEIU, Local 2, as the union representing 10 workers at the Association of Community College Trustees in Washington, D.C. 89 workers at Sibelco in Barkersville, North Carolina, filed a petition to hold a union election with the United Mine Workers of America, UMWA. 26 workers at Generation Hope in Washington, D.C., filed a petition to hold a union election with Workers United. The Protective Security Officers Members Union of America is rating a unit of 28 security guards at Paragon Systems in Washington, D.C., already represented by the Security, Police, and Fire Professionals of America, SPFPA. 190 workers at American University in Washington, D.C. filed a petition to hold a union election with the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, Local 500. 4 workers at Broadway Ford in St. Louis, Missouri, filed a petition to hold a union election with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, District Lodge 5. 16 workers at the Y Down, a coffee shop in Washington, D.C., filed a petition to hold a union election with Workers United, as did 17 more Y Down workers at another D.C. location. 6 workers at Wells Fargo in Fort Worth, Texas, filed a petition to hold a union election with Wells Fargo Workers United, CWA. 17 workers at MV Transportation in Port St. Lucie, Florida, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Amalgamated Transit Union, ATU, Local 1577. 18 workers at Democracy, North Carolina in Morrisville, North Carolina, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Communication Workers of America, CWA. 5 security guards at Kerberos in Falls Church, Virginia, filed a petition to hold a union election with the SPFPA. In campaign updates, in another first for the non-union auto sector, after the results of the union election were certified in the landslide victory for the UAW at Volkswagen in Chattanooga, the union and the company released a joint statement saying both parties are, quote, committed to a strong and successful future and, quote, focused on collective bargaining and entering negotiations in the spirit of working together to reach a fair agreement. In the run-up to the union election at Mercedes in Vance, Alabama, a poll shows that 52% of Alabamians support the union effort, while only 21% are opposed. Meanwhile, Governor Ivey is trying a different tact, now refraining from saying that workers don't deserve more. She is saying that she is having conversations with employers behind the scenes to fix the problems, and that is why workers shouldn't unionize. Trust the governor, who was literally attacking you just seconds ago to make your working conditions better. That's her message. Bryn Riley, president of the Alabama AFL-CIO, the state's largest labor federation, responded to Ivey's forays into the union conversation by saying that she is the real leech, not the UAW. In election results, 8 workers at ESG in Fort Benning, Georgia, voted 1-6 against unionization with the International Union of Operating Engineers, IUOE, Local 926. 7 workers at Mississippi Power in Gulfport, Mississippi, withdrew their petition for a union election with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, Local 1211. 62 workers at Livingston Place at Southern Avenue in Washington, D.C. voted unanimously in favor of unionization with 1199 SEIU, United Healthcare Workers East. 9 workers at Wayne Sanderson Farms in Enterprise, Alabama, voted 8-1 in favor of unionization with the IAMAW. 5 workers at Wells Fargo in Bradenton, Florida, voted 4-1 in favor of unionization with Wells Fargo Workers United, CWA. In settlements, grievances, and unfair labor practices, union workers at Trader Joe's, including some in the South, were sued by the company for copyright infringement. That case has now been won by the union, with the court saying the suit was, quote, meritless and demanding the company pay over $100,000 in attorney's fees for the union. Strikes and bargaining updates, union workers saw record annual raises of 6.3% on average for the 12 months ending in March 2024, while non-union workers saw raises of 4.1% on average over the same time period, not much higher than inflation. UAW President Shawn Fain renewed his call for unions to prepare for mass strike action on May the 1st, 2028. Labor councils across the country are carrying the load for for part of this effort in an effort that they are calling Bargain Together. You can learn more and find sample resolutions for your council or union at bargaintogether.org. Members of the Texas State Employees Union, TSEU, CWA Local 6186, hosted a rally last week calling on the University of Texas officials to stop the purge. At the beginning of the month, UT abruptly fired nearly 60 staff, mostly women and people of color, working in the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office and programs. Orlando, Florida hotel workers, unionized with Unite Here, held a May Day rally in preparation of upcoming contract negotiations, where the union will seek to raise standards in the 300,000-strong hospitality sector in the city. Florida is inching towards dead last in average teacher pay, falling from number 48 to number 51, or to number 50 out of 51. Those are all the states plus D.C. That fall came this year. Now they are behind only West Virginia, who holds the record for lowest average teacher pay in the United States. 100 union nurses protested the April 27 Frist Family Gala at the Frist Art Museum in Nashville, Tennessee, a black tie event named for the family that founded and is a major shareholder in HCA, the largest for-profit healthcare company in the country. In politics and legislation, the Warehouse Worker Protection Act has been introduced in the U.S. Senate, with a version to be introduced in the House in the coming weeks. The bill, which would require large warehouse employers like Amazon to disclose quotas, prevents said quotas from interfering with safety, and direct the Department of Labor to create new rules around safety in the industry, has the support of the Teamsters. Injury rates at Amazon facilities are 76% higher than the rest of the warehouse industry. The Louisiana Senate is scheduled to vote on a paycheck dues deduction ban for public sector unions, and the Louisiana House passed a bill repealing a mandate that children be given a 30-minute lunch break after working for 5 hours. The House passed another bill that would prohibit people from even discussing unions on the job if they work for the state of Louisiana, but this vote was alleged to be rife with irregularities, with the Louisiana Eliminator cataloging multiple votes that were recorded differently from how the legislator voted, with the total in favor being exactly the amount needed to send the bill to the Senate. The Department of Labor announced a final rule to strengthen farm worker protections, which adds new protections for worker self-advocacy, clarifies for-cause termination in H-2A contracts, makes foreign labor recruitment more transparent, and more. The AFL-CIO has applauded the rule change. The final language for the 2025 Federal Aviation Administration is out, with the Teamsters and the AFL-CIO endorsing its passage. There was some concern that the bill would include increasing retirement age for pilots, but this was ultimately not included in the 2025 reauthorization. That's it. If we missed anything, you can let us know at tvlr.fm/contact. We're going to be right back talking to Lance, a campus worker at Jacksonville State University, about their campaign for a living wage. Don't go anywhere.
Benefit Architects has proudly supported union members and union-made products for over 35 years. If you are a federal employee and an AFGE member, you're eligible for hundreds of dollars in money-saving benefits, including group life insurance, dental insurance, and AFLAC insurance. Additionally, if you're a union member but don't work for the federal government, you can still qualify for several of these money-saving policies. So give Tate Cure a call at 256-215-6769 for details and to enroll. Again, that is Tate Cure at 256-215-6769.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and family members are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough even to keep their jobs. We can fix this. It's time for us to find a way to close the health care coverage gap so that people can remain at work. Let's make this a priority. Let's close this gap and cover Alabama. To learn more and how you can help, visit coveralabama.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law, the name with proven results.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. If you have anything you'd like to add, you can give us a call, 844-899-887-8857. We have on the line now Lance Ingwerson, a member of the United Campus Workers at Jacksonville State University. Lance, thank you for taking the time to talk to us this morning. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jacob. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Adam.
Absolutely. So why don't you, just introduce yourself and, what do you do at Jacksonville State? What's your job, and, how did you get that job? Did you grow up around Jacksonville State?
Sure. I'm happy to answer those. I'm currently an associate professor of history at Jacksonville State. I'm also the campus co-chair for our chapter of United Campus Workers. No, I grew up in the Atlanta area, so I am familiar with the region, not the specific place, and then moved around a lot. Have lived kind of all over the country, out of the country, and came back here in 2019 to take this job.
Gotcha. So what is the United Campus Workers? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so we are part of the umbrella of the Communications Workers of America. We're public sector union employees. And United Campus Workers operates in 13 different states currently, mostly in the U.S. South. So Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia. But we've also, there are also United Campus Workers chapters in Colorado, Arizona, a very recent one in Utah, and in Wisconsin as well. So that's the structure of how we're organized. Currently, we're organized as statewide locals. But that is in the process of changing. We're going to basically create one big southeastern local for at least all the locals that are in the southeast. We're doing that for a few different reasons, administrative and otherwise. But yeah, so United Campus Workers started about 20 years ago. It started at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and it was an effort there to unionize as workers. And then in the 2010s, maybe mid 2010s or so, they did a bigger push outside of Tennessee. And so United Campus Workers came to the state of Alabama in 2019 at University of Alabama, and then in 2020 at Auburn. And then we officially started our chapter, I guess, in maybe late 2021, but we didn't launch publicly until last year, August of 2023.
Right. And that's an interesting geographical boundary, because we're seeing across, the West, the Midwest, and the Northeast, huge wins at universities for unions, huge blowout election victories. But what we're seeing in the South is kind of an interesting situation, because, in a lot of the South, and including in Alabama, there's no provision in the law for collective bargaining as such, as it is typically done. And so where unions like, the UE or the UAW or the SEIU, where they have kind of largely just left those jurisdictions alone, there's not a lot of activity as far as I can see in universities where there are no collective bargaining. There is no collective bargaining set up. The United Campus Workers has kind of filled in that gap where the typical process of collective bargaining is not allowed to happen, but still, there is a place for unions and unionism and collective action. Can you talk to us about that dynamic, being a public sector union in an area and in an occupation where there is no provision in the law for a union election or a collective bargaining agreement?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Jacob. That was something that I wanted to talk a little bit about. So, we've seen a lot of movement recently in the private sector, and the public sector operates quite differently. This might be something that is familiar or unfamiliar to the listeners. In the public sector, we don't have collective bargaining. You're right. We don't have all the tactics available to us. It's against state law for us to strike. And in the state of Alabama. And so what we do in the public sector is it's called pressure organizing. And so our job is to come together collectively. It's to try to really raise awareness around issues and sort of ratchet up the pressure on our employers to do better by their employees. And so that's one of the big differences between public sector and private sector. We, in the private sector, you have to sort of file for a union election. You've got to have 50% plus one in order to create a chapter. We don't have those requirements. So in some ways, it's a little easier in the public sector to get started. But it is really hard to keep going in the public sector because of the state laws.
Right. Because, you have to really be continuously making the case that this is a worthwhile investment of money, sure, in dues, but even more than that, time, right? You have to be continually making the case that it is worthwhile for people to involve themselves in this activity. And so, on that note, what are some of the things that you as the United Campus Workers at Jacksonville State are doing to try to, improve your lives and the lives of your coworkers?
Yeah, so we're engaged in a campaign. So we, like I said, the first members joined back in late 2021. We worked for almost probably a year and a half to get things structured in a way that we could be prepared for a public launch, which we did in August of 2023. And that's been really successful. Our membership has more than doubled since then. And over the course of the fall of 2023, we worked with the members to develop a campaign. And we launched that first campaign in January of this year. And that campaign is around hourly workers on campus. And so the idea is we've got hourly workers who are paid really, really poorly. Student workers start at $8.25 an hour. Housekeepers start at $9.09 an hour. Groundskeepers start at $10.50 an hour. And so that's our sort of range for our hourly workers. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was to really try to put pressure on the university to increase minimum pay for hourly workers to $15 an hour, which we see in our local area even. When you're out looking for jobs in the Jacksonville area, even at the local school systems, they're at $15 an hour. And so we're trying to get the university to at least match that. And so, we started that campaign in January with an open letter to the president and the CFO of the university. And then we launched a petition. We got about 700 signatures on that petition so far. We delivered that in person to the president's office, along with comments that signers included there. And we've held some tabling events and other kinds of events on campus just to try to raise awareness that we have a union, that it's open. We're a wall-to-wall union, so it's open to undergraduate and graduate student workers, staff, faculty, full-time, part-time. So that's the campaign we've been engaged in, and we had we had some really a good first step news that happened earlier this week. The Board of Trustees voted on a proposal for a one-time pay increase for most all employees at the university. More is going to folks who make less. Less is going to folks who make more. But that was in our mind, that was a good first step. The CFO asked the board for about $1.5 million extra in budget to be able to cover that. And then she said that she is planning to go back to the board in October with a proposal for permanent increases for staff and faculty on campus. And so we're optimistic, we're hopeful, but we're going to keep the pressure on. Obviously, they're not always great at being transparent about how they're developing that proposal and what that proposal is going to look like. So we've got to be ready in the event that the proposal that gets that appears to the board or that gets to the board is really favorable to the workers and actually meets the demands that we have.
How has what has been the reaction from your coworkers and the community around Jacksonville State to this campaign? And is there recognition, particularly among your coworkers, that this push for the one-time raise and then the potential for a permanent wage increase is derivative of the union's campaign?
We're still trying to figure that out. That's a great question. The initial signs are positive. People know that we're around because we've got members across the university, and they talk to their coworkers, even coworkers who haven't joined the union yet. And the sense is initially we were met with some skepticism about, this is just another thing that's not going to work. And so now it's our job to communicate that, look, we did this, we put pressure on, we raised awareness of these issues, we've gotten a lot of support, and it works. And so we're hoping that we're going to be able to use this to draw in more members, expand our membership, and then hopefully prepare for upcoming campaigns. This is just the first of what we hope will be a number of campaigns to improve conditions for folks.
We're in a climate right now in Alabama where the business and political class are going on really an unprecedented assault in the media, at least, on the UAW in particular, but unionism in general, even as a poll came out showing that 52% of Alabamians support the UAW's campaign at Mercedes and Vance specifically, but have any local officials or state officials from your area reacted to this campaign negatively? Have you gotten any pushback from state representatives or the local chamber or anything like that?
Not that we know of. I think one of the things that we were not expecting, because this has been the case for United Campus Workers in other places too, we're not expecting a response or like a direct response from the university. I think they've banded together and they've decided that the best way to treat this effort is just to try to ignore us. And so So I think we kind of expected that. We were able to get a response about 4 months later, and the president told us in a meeting of faculty of one of the colleges that that the university was not planning to engage us. He said that there are avenues that exist already for us to engage, but one of the things that we've done is kind of blown up those silos. We're grouped by classification at the university, so they like to treat staff as staff. They like to treat faculty differently as faculty. They like to treat students. And one of the things that our union's doing is kind of busting those divisions up in a good way. It's really it's making progress. So we're not expecting responses from them, but we're seeing action, and that's ultimately what we want more than anything.
Right. And like you said, it's going to be really important for you to make the case that the action that they're taking is connected to the pressure that you're putting on them. You mentioned that there are United Campus Workers chapters at UA and Auburn. How closely are y'all in coordination on these campaigns to raise wages and deliver other benefits to working folks at these universities? I know that they have similar campaigns at their universities. What kind of coordination goes on between your groups across Alabama?
Yeah, the leadership of each of the chapters is in constant communication, and so I'm familiar with the folks who are leading the efforts at Auburn and at Alabama. We do talk. We try to strike the balance between coordinating efforts versus making sure that we're covering things that are unique to our campuses. Alabama and Auburn both were able to get minimum wage increases on their campus for their campus workers to $15 an hour. And so their fight is now to move even beyond that. So I know at Auburn, they're working on a $17.50 minimum wage. They've got a petition going now. At Alabama, they're trying to push for a $20 an hour minimum wage. And they've kind of grouped their demands in this most recent petition. I know at Alabama, they want a $5,000 cost of living increase across the board for every single worker on campus. And at Auburn, they're working on another COLA increase, and then things related to graduate worker stipends. So I think the track that both of those campuses are taking right now is to group their demands together, which is a little different from the campaign. We've decided to really focus our campaign on hourly wages for workers. But yeah, we're in constant communication. We've got a board between all the different chapters, and we have members outside of those universities that just haven't formed public chapters yet. So we like to hit a certain number before chapters are able to go public. And so we've got members at a number of other universities, but who just don't have large enough numbers yet to form public chapters.
What can people do to support if they're listeners and they don't work at universities? They're community members, they're folks that are listening to this, but they're supportive of your efforts. Is there anything that they can do to help?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage them to follow us on social media in particular. We've all got Facebook pages for each of the chapters. And if they want to join, you can go to ucwal.org. That is the statewide local page, tells you more about the different chapters, tells you how to join. And they can also even contact if they're out of state. I heard you saying that some of your listeners were listening in from other places. If they're out of state, they can go to ucw-cwa.org. That is the United Campus Workers for all 13 states, and it's got ways to contact each of those individual locals. And so beyond that, I think just trying to support. Anytime we have public events, public actions, we'd love to have folks who are not part of United Campus Workers, but who are supporters, just community allies, helping us at those events, spreading word, helping us raise awareness, circulating petitions. Really lots of different ways that folks who are not a part of the union can support us in our efforts.
Anything else we didn't touch on that you want to make sure we get to before we let you go?
No, I think it's an exciting time to be a union member in the state of Alabama, in the South in general. There's something happening here. It's nice to be a part of that. And really appreciate shows like this and a lot of the efforts that people are putting in. It's really hard. I was watching the interview that you had with the UAW folks from Mercedes and Hyundai. last week, and just like they've just been killing it. I mean, it's great. I've heard their commercials on the radio, other places like that, and just trying to increase our collaboration and communication across the public and private sector unions. There are not many public sector union members in the state of Alabama, largely because of those state laws. And so we're just trying to figure out ways that we can work together to improve working conditions for everyone here in the state.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you, Lance, and appreciate United Campus Workers. Y'all are doing something really important. The public sector is full of opportunity here to organize in Alabama if we get creative, if we're bold enough to do it. And so I appreciate what y'all are doing at JSU, at Auburn, at UA. Like you said, there's members all over. And hopefully, next year we'll be talking to even more chapters of United Campus Workers across the state. So just keep up the good work, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Glad to have you. So we mentioned the Mercedes campaign. About 5,000 workers at Mercedes in Vance, Alabama are going to be voting from May the 13th to the 17th. So we are less than 10 days away right now from the vote. They're going to be voting on whether or not to unionize. And folks, the business and political class are scared, folks. They are so scared that Kay Ivey is at least wanting people to believe that she is pushing executives behind the scenes to make life better for the workers, and that so that they don't have to unionize. All you got to do is just trust the governor. Trust the governor that she's going to, whenever you have a complaint, talk to the executives at these big companies. And you don't have to worry about anything. You don't have to worry about doing anything yourself. Commerce Secretary Ellen McNair was invited by Todd Stacy to come on Alabama Public Television to bash unions and Alabama's workers and explain why we don't deserve a say over our working conditions, although so far, as I can tell, the same invitation has not been extended to the union or anybody in the plant who is supporting the union, which is a super great use of public funds attacking Alabama's workers.
Right. I love when my tax dollars are funding a politician to go on television that is also funded by my tax dollars to talk crap about us. Just love that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing, actually. When my politicians use my money to attack me. I love that. But anyways, McNair, Commerce Secretary, was on Capitol Journal, which again is on Alabama Public Television, with Todd Stacy talking about this. And she said, quote, Governor Ivey has been on the phone with both leaders of Mercedes and Hyundai and has said, if there are issues, you need to fix this. And those are really strong words, folks. I don't know if, I don't know how, obviously there's going to be some huge changes now because Governor Ivey said you need to fix this.
If there's something, if there's something going on,
there's something going on.
Apparently there might be. There might be, apparently. I don't know. The governor's getting lots of intel.
This again, McNair's words. She's been very bold. Again, that is very bold language. She's been very bold in using her voice to encourage Mercedes and Hyundai to do what they need to do to be sure that this isn't necessary. She went on to say, could work conditions be better? Yes. This is a wake-up for them to be responsive to the employees' needs and listen to them. I think absolutely that needs to be done, but hopefully we can do that on a one-to-one basis without a third party interfering. Yeah, so that's great. Love for bosses to be able to say that nonsense completely unchallenged and without actual workers in Alabama being able to respond. I love that.
I don't know if I'm not the brightest bulb, but I do think that the Commerce Secretary and Governor Ivey might qualify as a third party here.
Right.
I don't know. I don't want to give myself too much credit, but I think perhaps
that's true.
There could be third party interference.
That's true.
It's
that's
just interesting.
The difference is the third party is one that you don't have control over directly as a worker in the facility. So, you can tell they're really, really desperate now because you'll remember when the campaign kicked off, the messaging was Ivey touting the high skills and high wages Those were the words that were used in conjunction with one another. High skills and high wages of Alabama's auto workers, and the fact that these are great jobs as reasons not to unionize. That was the messaging. You don't deserve better was the argument. Now the argument is honestly almost a total 180-degree flip. With about 2 weeks to go in the campaign, the messaging is now, I'm fighting for you against these executives, using bold language like, if there are issues, you need to fix it. That's the messaging now. I'm fighting for you against the executives, so you don't need a union. That's the messaging now from Governor Ivey and Commerce Secretary Ellen McNair. But obviously, workers should not be fooled by the disingenuous about-face, because as soon as the union threat abates, they're going to go right back to ignoring you, both the politicians and the businesses, and the only way to hold them accountable is to unionize and take some of that power that they hold over you for yourself and your coworkers. And I use that language specifically as soon as the union threat abates, because longtime TVLR listeners will remember our conversation with employment attorney Arthur Davis in a discrimination case against Hyundai, where they are alleging, and in fact, Hyundai admitted to hiring a black woman into the executive class in Montgomery for the purpose of combating a union campaign. I actually spoke to workers at Mercedes, at Hyundai in Montgomery about this case a couple of weeks ago, and they said that was, this woman she was in management before, but she was elevated to a higher position, and her entire role was explaining to workers how they don't need a union. And then, so the campaign there's been a campaign at Hyundai with the UAW for a long time, like for a decade or more, but it's waxed and waned, right? And so after this is the amazing thing is this is the language that Hyundai used in response to an EEO complaint from the black woman executive. She said she filed an EEO complaint, and she said, I was fired for discriminatory reasons, right? I was fired for discriminatory reasons. And Hyundai said in their response, in writing to the government, that no, you're misunderstanding. You were not fired because you're black. You were only hired because you're black. And we wanted a black woman to fight the union campaign. And once the union threat abated, those were the words in the response. Once the union threat abated, she was no longer needed. Her services were no longer required, and they got rid of her. That's exactly what's going to happen with all of this, rhetoric about, we're interested in changing. The governor talking about how if there are issues, I'm speaking very boldly about, the hypothetical possibility of issues and hypothetically the importance of fixing them if hypothetically they existed. The very bold pronouncements like that. All that's going to go away. So the thing that workers need to do, obviously, is take power for themselves, negotiate for themselves, and get a contract for themselves. They do not need to rely. Actually, what they don't need to do is, there is some amount of correctness in some of the rhetoric that's being used. They actually don't need to rely on a third party like the governor or like the commerce secretary. What they need to do is organize themselves in coordination with their fellow auto workers and make their lives better themselves. Take the power, use it, get more, pull down more of the value that you're creating, have power on the job, et cetera, et cetera. The UAW put out another video last week that is illustrative of the reason that Ivey felt she had to change tactics, because things aren't great at Mercedes. They could be a lot better. And here's Alabama auto workers talking about their compensation in comparison to the CEOs.
Let's talk about fairness at Mercedes-Benz in Alabama. In the plush offices of Mercedes executives, something outrageous is happening. Last year, Mercedes CEO saw his pay increase by a staggering 80%. Not stopping there, the entire Mercedes management board chose to give themselves a 78% pay increase last year.
That's over $27 million in raises for only 8 people. It would take a production worker at top pay 2 years to earn what a Mercedes executive earns in just 1 week.
But what about the hardworking Mercedes employees right here in Alabama? This year, Mercedes announced they were giving us a meager 6% pay increase. That's what we call the Alabama discount, and we're going to bring it to an end.
It's time for change at Mercedes.
It's time for justice in Alabama.
It's time for Mercedes workers to stand up.
Now, some people will tell you that that is meaningless, that all of this conversation about executive pay is totally meaningless. It has no bearing on actually what's happening on the ground with the employees. It's totally meaningless that 8 people on the executive board for Mercedes US got an 80% raise while workers got a 6% raise. It's totally meaningless that the total value of raises for those 8 people was $27 million, not in total compensation, in raises. That is the delta between how much they made this year and last year. $27 million more. They're going to try to convince you that that's meaningless, that doesn't mean anything. And yet, obviously, even in the most wooden reading of these facts, there's a certain grain of truth to the idea that, okay, look, you give one person an 80% raise, and you give them $1 million more or $500,000 more or whatever, once you distribute that out between however many employees, that's not going to amount to a whole lot. But in this instance, even in the most wooden reading of these facts, if you took the $27 million in raises, remember, they're millionaires already, right? 1 year without a raise would not kill them. In fact, 1 year without a raise, they would still be making more than most of us will make in our lifetimes, et cetera, et cetera. If you did not give these executives $27 million in raises for the U.S. corporate board, you could give every single U.S. Mercedes employee a $2,000 raise. Is that huge? No, but it's not insignificant. That is not meaningless. It is not meaningless that you could distribute the delta in pay for 8 people among 14,500 employees and give every one of those $2,000 more. That is not meaningless. That is not insignificant. Also, as is obvious for people who are not being disingenuous and who have not had their brains poisoned by boss propaganda, these kind of expenditures, in the face of a lack of expenditures for employees, belie a culture of theft from the people who produce to the people who own. It's not just those 8 people. It's going to be people below that who are also making still too high salaries for management outside of that board. It's going to be excessive payments to shareholders, excessive focus on stock value as opposed to creating a good product and investing in their products, in their facilities, and in their people. For Daimler, for example, another German manufacturing company, they made enough profits in North America to double the compensation for their American workers, not raise prices, and still make a profit. That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about with these companies. Boeing is another example. Huge, huge executive compensation. And, with the one CEO, yes, it's true. You take his salary, you distribute him among the thousands of Boeing employees in the United States, it's not going to amount to much. But again, it belies a culture of theft from the people who produce to the people who own. It's not just the CEO, it's the whole corporate board who are making too much money. It's all of the shareholders who are making too much money. It's all of that. All of that goes into the whole picture. And when you take the whole picture into account, yes, it's very meaningful, actually, that the people who own are making significantly more than the people who produce as classes. As classes. And, for Boeing, it's particularly egregious because you're looking at the degradation of a company whose, previously, pilots said, if it ain't Boeing, I ain't going, right? It was a company of engineers dedicated to the creation of, good products, good flying machines. And now it is just a profit-making enterprise. This is the idea that profits, the profit incentives is inherently good and productive and valuable for society is totally and completely destroyed by just looking at Boeing as a case study, right? I mean, the pursuit of profits is what has destroyed Boeing as a company. It's destroyed it. And so, that should not be what we chase as a society, the pursuit of profit. Now, right. Another argument that they're using, so they've recently shifted tactics. They've shifted tactics, the anti-union forces in Alabama. Previously, it was, you have it too good already. You don't deserve more. Now do what I'm telling you to do and, vote against the union because you don't deserve more. That's what you should believe. You don't deserve more. That didn't work. They didn't really get the vibes that was working among the workers in Montgomery at Hyundai and Vance at Mercedes. So they're like, actually you do deserve more, and I'm fighting for you with the companies, hypothetically, in the event that hypothetically maybe you do deserve more. I'm fighting for you about these hypothetical, if there are issues. Another argument is the argument about offshoring, right? They're going to move. If you unionize, they're going to move. Now, of course, in these arguments, specifically as it relates to Mercedes, in particular, there is no accounting for the fact that Mercedes and Volvo and Daimler still produce in Germany, right? How do you account for the fact that these companies all still have manufacturing facilities in Germany where workers, obviously they make more money than American workers, but even more than that, they have more paid leave. Workers in Germany work months less than American workers. They don't have more hours off every year paid than American workers. They don't have more days off than American workers that are paid. They don't even have more weeks off than American workers who are paid. They have months more off of work that are paid. And yet somehow, and then that's on top of, they all have health insurance. They all have paternity leave, that, all of these things, it's going on in Germany. Significantly higher total compensation packages in Germany. And yet, they still produce in Germany. Volvo does and Mercedes does. How do you account for that in your, argument that, if Alabama auto workers in Tuscaloosa unionize, then it's going to be completely uncompetitive and they're going to move their investment. They're not going to invest in Alabama. It's they never account for that. They never account for that. And interestingly, something that they've been doing actually in this argument about, if you unionize, they're going to move, is they have been citing the example of the Alabama sock industry. Alabama was formerly the sock capital of the world. We produced more socks than any other country or than anywhere else in the world. Everybody got their socks from Alabama. And then after NAFTA and free trade and all of this, Bill Clinton and the Democrats and Republicans, all the sock production moved to Honduras. That's something that that has, and it's fascinating to me that they are citing this industry because the sock industry in Alabama, for decades before it was outsourced, was non-union. It was not a union industry in the state of Alabama. And yet, it still moved. So obviously, you've got two stories on either end of this, right? You've got on one end, workers in Germany are still producing cars and they're making significantly more, and they're union, making significantly more than American auto workers. And then on the other end, you've got a non-union industry in Alabama that totally outsourced. So you can't, the unionization, the point of that, what the thing that you should take from these two sides of the outsourcing conversation is that actually unionization is not going to be the make or break thing in whether or not an industry stays in a particular place. There are greater forces at work that actually unions can help combat, like we saw in Gadsden with Goodyear, where the union kept the plant in Gadsden for 30 years longer than the company would have had it there, right? So it's not a very convincing argument if you are, if you're kind of broadly aware of the political economy of in the world, in the United States. It's not very convincing. And additionally, one of the things that, there's threats, implicit threats about, not just like maybe they're going to move to Mexico, or maybe they're going to move to Mississippi instead. And that is the strategic brilliance of the UAW's campaign to organize the entire non-union auto sector. Because if they are able to organize the entire non-union auto sector, they are going to take labor out of competition. That is the goal, to take labor out of competition and to have investment decisions not be made by this low road approach, this competition by states to see whose people they can exploit the most. Right? That's the importance of unionization of the entire industry. And at the same time as they're doing this, they're materially supporting independent union efforts in Mexico with campaigns to raise wages and improve working conditions in Mexico. So again, not only are we taking labor out of competition in the South, we are taking labor out of competition across international boundaries. And internationally, we are standing together with workers in Mexico and Alabama and Germany and saying we are all going to be standing in solidarity to support one another and see everybody's conditions improve. That's actually the answer. The answer to corporate greed and outsourcing threats is not to further debase ourselves. It is to work with our sisters and brothers across state lines and across international borders. So there you go. Not a convincing argument, I have to say. We're going to go to a break, and we're going to be right back. We're going to talk about, we're going to get to Boss Watch, and we're going to talk about the case being made right now on Twitter that teachers and public employees have it too good, in particular as it relates to parental leave. So, we're going to see if we just talked about a couple of unconvincing arguments. Maybe this one will be more convincing. Find out when we come back.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and neighbors are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough to keep their jobs. We need to fix this. Let's close the health care coverage gap. To learn more, visit coveralabama.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452. Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
I'm Attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host Adam Keller. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number if you have anything to add. Self-proclaimed anarcho-capitalist Argentinian President Javier Milei put forward a piece of legislation in Argentina to raise taxes on the income of working people while lowering taxes on assets. That's right. This piece of legislation is part of a major package of economic reforms that also includes allowing Milei to restructure or privatize government agencies, incentives to attract foreign investment, and other revisions to labor law. The proposal to raise taxes on income in particular, it would do this by lowering the salary threshold where taxes begin, right? So, in America we have tax brackets, and so your first, $30,000 is it? Your first $30,000 is untaxed by the federal government. It sounds like they have something similar there. And so what this does is it lowers the threshold on which income taxes begin to be collected. That proposal in particular has drawn ire from unions. Both the SOEA, Oilseed Union, their members process soybeans, which is a key export for Argentina, and the United Maritime Workers Union struck for 2 days this week over that proposal in particular, shutting down exports and ending soybean processing work for the duration of their strike. The Argentine Confederation of Transport Workers announced a strike themselves. With their strike, all air, ground, and sea transport will be ended beginning on Monday, May the 6th. Their strike seems to be aimed to protest the fiscal reforms more broadly, but they too have called out the income tax hike for their workers in communications about the strike in particular as well. So, they're more broadly targeting the reforms, but they're also in particular upset about this tax hike. The package of fiscal reforms passed the lower house in Argentina despite the strike by the soybean producers and the maritime workers and the threat from the transport workers, but still must go through the upper house. Reuters is reporting that stronger opposition is expected in that body of the legislature. Apparently, Milei's party only holds 7 of the 72 seats in the upper body, with 33 seats being controlled by the opposition, meaning that the opposition only needs 4 votes from other parties to stop the package entirely. I'm pulling all of that from Reuters, the Buenos Aires Herald, and the Buenos Aires Times. So interesting stuff happening in Argentina. obviously particularly odious figure in Javier Milei, and ironic that his package of fiscal reforms includes a tax hike on working Argentinians. A bill in the Alabama State Senate would have given state employees 8 weeks of paid leave in the event of the birth of a child, adoption, or the stillbirth of a baby. And it passed, actually, 26-2, which is a really a landslide when you're talking about a bill that improves the lives of Alabamians. Having it pass 26-2 in the state Senate is remarkable. But Senate Pro Tem Greg Reed killed it. He is not going to transmit this package or this bill to the House, and so it will not have the opportunity to be passed by the House and signed by the governor this legislative session. Vivian Figures, the sponsor of the bill, a Democrat from where is Figures from? Montgomery?
Mobile.
Oof, I was way off. Vivian Figures from Mobile, the sponsor of the bill, was very unhappy. Adam, what were some of the things that she was saying?
Yeah, I mean, she just brought out, frankly, that it's inappropriate for the Senate leader to prevent a vote in the House on this, that there's no need to do it. There's no need to wait another year. And she pointed out that, none of the people who are making this decision are actually going to be pregnant. None of them are going to give birth. I mean, in most cases, none of them are even, going to be having children anytime soon. I mean, most of the folks she's talking to, her colleagues, are grandparents or great-grandparents or, hell, great-great-grandparents, looking at some of them. So, she brought out some of the hypocrisy around it, which I really appreciated. She said that you have no idea what it's like, not only the physical things we have to go through, but the mental and emotional things we have to go through. The least you can all do is give us a little time, 8 weeks to deal with that. I just want to say I'll be coming back with a vengeance next year, and I won't be by myself. So really disappointing to see the way that this bill was kind of watered down over time. Men were not included for this parental leave. It also brought it down from 12 weeks, which had originally been the consideration. So, disappointed to see that even this compromise version is not going to get a full, fair, hearing in the House and an opportunity to pass this year, because it seems like there's not a ton of opposition necessarily. Right. At least there wasn't on the floor of the Senate. And maybe, I don't know, maybe there's maybe there's a desire to slow this down and an attempt
without having to say that you voted against it.
Right. Because, it's a bad look to say you're pro-family, you're a family values legislator.
Pro-life.
You're pro-life, but you're against maternity leave for teachers, right, that are in state employees. So, I think it could be that. It's a way to kill the bill without directly voting against it. So it's really disappointing. But I do think that there was a lot of momentum built around this issue this year, more than I've seen throughout my career. I became a teacher back in 2012, had a daughter in 2015. My wife was also a teacher, and was a teacher at the time of giving birth. And so we experienced firsthand, like, the lack of parental leave and how just how devastating it can be. I mean, I think my daughter was like in kindergarten before my wife ever actually was positive in her sick leave balance. It took her years to build back up her sick leave because, not only do you miss a lot of time with giving birth, but babies get sick a lot. Babies have lots of appointments. Perhaps some legislators don't remember that or know that, but it takes a lot of sick leave to be a parent of a young child. And so I think there's a lot of momentum. I want to see the momentum continue. I think it really requires public educators and state employees working in coalition, working together, and amplifying this issue, to get it across the finish line for everybody, and don't leave anybody out.
Well, now, that testimony does not jive with the assertions of at least one conservative capitalist boss, employer, publisher, newspaper owner, person who derives his living from owning rather than producing and laboring, Scott Buttram. He says that state employees, especially teachers, I'm not totally sure what that means, offer some of the best PTO policies of any jobs in Alabama. Not sure why the Alabama Senate Republicans would even seriously consider this. So, and he says that when our daughter, his wife was a teacher, when our daughter was born during the school year in 2006, she had a ton of PTO. His wife being having a ton of PTO, far more than needed for paternity or for maternity leave. This is a sham, he said. The PTO policy is an outstanding benefit. An outstanding benefit. In just 5 years of working, an Alabama teacher could accumulate 17 weeks of paid time off, even if they had been out sick for an entire week every single year for 5 years. They would still have 12 weeks of paid time off. So, I mean, there you go. That's if you're only sick for 5 days in a year, or your kids are only sick for 5 days in a year, right? That's a pretty big asterisk that he just kind of waves away. But yeah, so I mean, Scott is not impressed by by the argument that teachers and women deserve maternity leave in the state of Alabama. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I don't understand exactly how he's laying this all out here. I mean, you get one sick leave day per month. You get, provided by the state of Alabama, and now this is for teachers, you get 2 personal leave days per year. Okay? So, I'm not sure exactly where he's getting that, you could accumulate, 12 weeks of paid time off so easily. It's also unrealistic, like you said, but also we as educators know, perhaps better than most folks, how important it is that parents be home with their children, especially in those early weeks. Like, it's really formative. It has a really big impact on the child's development and on the family's development. Like, that's pretty overwhelmingly clear through research. Which, by the way, teachers actually have to read some of this stuff to get certified. We have to study a little bit of this child development and brain development, and turns out it's really good to not force them. Yeah, it actually helps when you don't force the mom back to work immediately, and when everyone has time to acclimate, and there's time for bonding and it's really, really important. So, like, schools should know that more than any other institution, because schools are impacted directly by this development, right? If things don't go well in the first 6 weeks of a child's life, it will impact that child for, throughout its academic career. The schools bear the brunt of that. So, like, if anything, schools should lead by example. They should be employers of example by providing paid maternity leave and paternity leave, for that matter, just paid parental leave, period. But yeah, it's asinine. I mean, you've got a profession that is 70-80% female. I don't have the statistics on how many of those teachers will give birth, but I mean, looking at the numbers, it's obvious the average teacher will give birth more than the average firefighter or the average cop or the average mechanic, right? Just realistically. And so this is a really important benefit that you can provide that will keep folks in the profession.
Right.
Because a lot of folks, especially if they're early in their career, they don't have any time built up, and they end up not coming back to the profession often. That happens. But if you've got a generous paid parental leave policy, that's even more reason to stay in. So I think it really helps with recruiting and retaining quality folks. It's the right thing to do morally and for families. and it's not really going to be much of a cost. I just don't anticipate very much cost at all. And, you know, evidently we have the money to spend it on school choice.
Right.
We've got the money to subsidize private and religious education of wealthy families. So, you know, I think we can afford to let teachers stay home when they give birth for a few weeks. Seems reasonable.
Yeah, and just to, you know, just to expand on that just very briefly, 1 sick day a month is 12 sick days and 2 personal days a year. So that's a minimum of 14 days off every year, a maximum of 17 if your local school district has the option of giving you 3 more personal days. You know, the idea that these numbers coming from you could accumulate, you know, and that he's really leaning on this ability to accumulate benefits that you have earned, that you have worked for, as if that's kind of ridiculous and like super generous, that you would be given the things that you earned and worked for. You know, I mean, that you were promised. You know, the idea that anybody, frankly, any employer does not allow vacation time to roll over if you decide that you do not want to take leave as often as somebody else. You should be able to do with that whatever you want at any employer. You know, the idea that it accumulates, or you can convert personal days to sick days at the end of the year, is not impressive. That's like bare minimum. Additionally, 14 days in a year of getting sick, or of even, you know, God forbid, you want to take a short trip and you take 1 or 2 personal days, that's not a lot. And so it would be difficult, yes, absolutely, to accumulate 17 weeks of paid time off after being in the classroom for 5 years. That's something that would be, you know, not necessarily impossible, but yes, difficult. And instead of saying that teachers should have to do that, should have to hope and push through, you know, being sick. You know, if they have kids, they're in, you know, the germy places that schools are, and coming to class anyway. You know, the idea that they should have to rely on not using any of the benefits that they earn year over year to hope that they get enough so that they can use that when they give birth is absurd, you know, and the idea that, and then, you know, his going balls to the wall against this, right? You know, it's one thing like, oh, I don't think it's fiscally responsible, you know, I would vote no or whatever. But the idea going out and saying they have some of the most generous and liberal PTO policies of any jobs in Alabama, far more than needed for maternity. I mean, what does that even mean? I worked in a restaurant and we had a woman work up until 12 hours before she gave birth, and she was back in the restaurant 2 days. You know, so what does that even mean? Far more than is needed for paternity. You're talking about needing for paternity. You could be talking about 36 hours. That's a meaningless statement. And they should be given maternity and paternity leave, obviously, because it's a good fiscal decision for the schools, for retention, and for, you know, attacking the labor shortage. And it's good morally. It's a good fiscal decision. And yeah, it's gross to be, you know, lambasting this effort in the way that he is.
Well, yeah, that guy's a creep. But on another story, though, in that vein, really, like I said, I want to see the State Employees Association. I want to see the AFT, American Federation of Teachers, the AEA, Alabama Education Association. They should all be up in arms, and they should all be demanding that this happen, because it's wild that in 2024 it's not already the standard.
Yeah.
It should be the standard. It is in the developed world and in other parts of this country, but, you know, not here in Alabama. It's the Alabama way.
Right.
That's the Alabama discount, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, so yeah, I want to see folks up in arms on that, and I think it's a winning issue. It's an issue that resonates with people. It's good for families. It's good for the teachers. It's good for kids. So let's do it.
Boss Watch. Every week, bosses break the law, and we take a look at it. In South Carolina, a major East Coast ship repair and servicing company's failure to make safety its #1 priority, a promise made on its website, has led to another workplace fatality, the fourth in 5 years, a U.S. Department of Labor workplace safety investigation found. In November 2023, the department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration determined that a 41-year-old worker at Detyen's Shipyards, Incorporated, in North Charleston, had fallen almost 20 feet from an unguarded side of a small platform inside a gas tank aboard the U.S. naval ship First Lieutenant Jack Lummis. At the time, employees were preparing to flush the cargo vessel's fuel piping servicing and waiting for their coworker to descend a ladder. OSHA inspectors cited Detyen's Shipyard for willfully exposing workers to fall hazards by permitting them to access a platform level without guardrails. The agency also identified 2 serious violations for not providing adequate lighting to work safely in the area and for not making certain workers wear hard hats as others worked above them with hoses, knives, flashlights, and other tools. Inspectors also found the employer allowed workers to use a damaged extension cord, an other than serious violation. The agency has proposed about $200,000 in penalties following the November inspection. Since 2019, 4 employees have died on the job at the ship repair and service company, including 2 others involved in fatal falls in 2020 and 2022. Since 2014, OSHA has identified 33 serious violations at this one company across 18 inspections. In Florida, a Georgia construction contractor's failure to enforce safety regulations at an Arcadia worksite led to a 31-year-old steel erector suffering fatal fall injuries, an incident caused by the same workplace safety violations for which federal inspectors cited the same employer just 10 months earlier. A U.S. Department of Labor Occupational Safety and Health Administration investigation determined a 3-person crew employed by Landmark Erecting Incorporated of Hahira was installing metal roofing sheets on a building in November 2023 when one worker fell 12 feet onto a concrete slab below and suffered traumatic head injuries. OSHA cited the employer for a repeat violation for, again, not ensuring a worker used fall protection as they walked along a roof frame. The agency cited the company for a similar violation at a Tallahassee workplace in January of 2023. The agency also cited the employer with a serious violation for failing to ensure the availability of accessible medical treatment for the injured employee and an other than serious violation for not reporting a work-related fatality within 8 hours. As the law requires, OSHA proposed $46,000 in penalties to address the violations. In 2022, 307 Florida workers in all industries died due to workplace injuries. Of them, falls, slips, and trips were the cause of 78 fatalities, up from 69 in 2021. In Texas, Liberty Energy, doing business as Liberty Oilfield Services, will pay $265,000 to settle a race and national origin discrimination lawsuit brought on behalf of 3 mechanics by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the federal agency announced last week. According to the lawsuit, a black field mechanic and 2 Hispanic coworkers at Liberty Energy's Odessa, Texas location were subjected to a hostile environment and referred to in derogatory terms, including use of the N-word and other slurs, such as beaner and wetback. The employees alleged that they made reports to supervisors, management, and human resources about the discriminatory treatment, but no effective corrective or remedial action was taken by the company. The EEOC's suit charged that after making his report, the black mechanic was forced by management to perform undesirable work tasks and was isolated by his peers, with no meaningful action by company management to change the workplace atmosphere and the discriminatory assignments that followed his complaint. He was ultimately left no alternative but to resign. The alleged conduct violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination based on race and national origin. The EEOC filed suit in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas under the 2-year consent decree resolving the suit. In addition to monetary relief for the employees, Liberty Energy will adopt and distribute a policy for all human resources and management personnel to effectively respond to reports to discrimination, post a notice in the workplace informing employees of the settlement, adopt and develop a 1-800 hotline for reporting acts of discrimination and or harassment, and provide specialized training to employees on the federal laws that prohibit employment discrimination, including Title VII. Adam, have we got any plugs to wrap the show up?
Yeah, real quick. More Perfect Union is doing a party at Avondale today from 2 to 4 and an event tomorrow afternoon in Tuscaloosa. to support the UAW workers organizing in Alabama. Labor Notes has some great trainings, labornotes.org/events, thinking like an organizer and what to do when your union breaks your heart. And yeah, those were the two biggies that I wanted to make sure I threw out there.
We're going to have a great second half of the program. If you're listening to us on the radio right now in Huntsville, you can find the second half of the program. We are going to be continuing the stream on Facebook and YouTube at The Valley Labor Report. The second half of the program is going to be great. We're going to be talking to a person involved in a strippers union, one of only two, I believe, unionized strip clubs in the entire country. We're going to be talking to them about their campaign to unionize their club and ramifications for the industry more broadly. We're also going to be talking about some of Trump's comments on the UAW at a Michigan rally, a second whistleblower at Boeing coming up dead, and obviously talking about the campus protests across the country and Shawn Fain's one weird trick for Joe Biden to end the protests. Find us, Facebook, YouTube, The Valley Labor Report. Otherwise, we will see you next week. Okay. All right. That's it for us for the first half of the program. Like I said, we got a great second half of the show lined up for you today. Don't go anywhere. We are going to be right back.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Folks, welcome back. You are still listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. We've got a great overtime lined up for you today. Adam's going to be talking to us about just doing a little bit of education on the structure of unions. For a lot of folks that can be kind of kind of difficult to parse. It can be figuring out, what does it mean to be a local union, who bargains contracts, what's an international union, what's the AFL-CIO. So we figured it would be worthwhile to talk a little bit about that, just to kind of break that down for folks. We're also going to be talking to a stripper who unionized her club in the up in where was it? The North Hollywood, on the West Coast in North Hollywood. We're also going to be talking about the campus protests, some of the labor movement's response to it, and an independent Nebraska U.S. Senate candidate, former union leader, who has outraised the GOP Senate incumbent. The GOP U.S. Senate incumbent. It's a pretty remarkable thing. We're going to be talking about that. But Adam, let's go ahead and talk to us about the structures of the labor movement. Some of the highlights, some important things for folks to know as they are learning about unions or trying to get involved in their union. What are some of the things that folks should know about the structures within the labor movement?
Yeah, it's helpful to know the different layers to the onion, and so wanted to just mention that you have a bargaining unit, which is typically your smallest, unit of workers that you're involved in. Your bargaining unit is at your employer. That would be the folks that you work alongside, and you're going to be bargaining for a contract with the same employer, and you'll be covered by the same contract, those of you in this bargaining unit. But the bargaining unit may be one of many inside of your local union. You'll be a member of a local, but you may be alongside folks who work at different companies, folks who are in different bargaining units. And so one really good example of this would be the Nonprofit Employees Union, NPEU. They actually represent some of our friends at the Economic Policy Institute, Jobs to Move America, some other, nonprofits across the country, actually. They have members all over, right? And so there are multiple different bargaining units within NPEU that, like I just named, those different employers, right? But NPEU, the Nonprofit Employees Union, is just one local of a bigger union, which is called the IFPTE. And so that international is a member of the AFL-CIO. So you have a bargaining unit that is a member of a local union. Your local union is affiliated with some sort of national or international union, typically. And then, in many but not all cases, your national or international union will belong to a federation. The National Federation is the AFL-CIO, American Federation of Labor, Congress of Industrial Organizations. It merged back in 1955. It's been the biggest labor federation ever since, but it's not the only one. Change to Win is another one out there. And so you could be a member of multiple organizations, and it's important to know where your membership actually lies and understand those differences between the bargaining unit, the broader local, and where your local sits in the overall structure of your national or international union, because they're all structured differently. in terms of, what influence you may have as a local union or as a bargaining unit inside of a local union. They all have different forms of democracy in terms of who elects who, what kind of positions do what. So those are all things to look into and to kind of explore as you go through your journey in the union movement, right? Because you need to know the lay of the land. You need to know the landscape and who you're engaging with and the different layers to membership. And the last thing I'll mention on this is that there are regional federations as well called labor councils, often called CLCs, Central Labor Councils, sometimes called labor federations. But these are regional bodies. And your local does not have to belong to these regional bodies, just like your local does not have to belong to the state federation of the AFL-CIO or the national federation necessarily. And in some cases, you may belong to a union that is part of the AFL-CIO, but does not belong to the state federation or the regional federation, right? So those are all things to explore and figure out, especially as a new member or as someone who's getting newly engaged and you're trying to get more involved in your union. Find out, are we part of the AFL-CIO? And if so, are we part of the state labor federation? Are we part of our local labor council? And if not, why not? And what do we need to do to look into that? Is it relevant? I would argue that the regional labor federations, the labor councils, are an incredibly important asset, and we're really proud of the work we're doing here in North Alabama. And I think there's a lot of exciting work happening with labor councils across the country. So I would encourage every union member listening, get involved in your local labor council and find out to what extent your local is involved with it, how you could support more, how you could get involved, because it's a great avenue for collaboration, right? It's the basic concepts of unions. There's strength in numbers. The more we come together, the stronger we are. So when different unions, different locals come together and cooperate and collaborate, of course, we're stronger that way as well. So that's a little bit about the basics of kind of understanding the structures of unions. But I think it's helpful to know just what you're a member of and how you can get involved at those different layers.
When we're thinking about, one of the reasons that you want to know the different structures within the labor movement and how they interact with one another is so that you can be thinking about strategies for the most effective use of each body, right? So a local union is going to be able to do and is best positioned to do different things than an international union, or maybe than a state council within your union, or than a central labor council, which is a federation of unions. What would be, I think, what the local union does really kind of speaks for itself. What are some best practices of like state federations of a union, like a state council of the machinists, for example, and then the international unions? What are some of the best practices for those different bodies? And then central labor councils, which are federations of different unions. What are some of the things that those different bodies can do and do best?
Right. I think by pulling resources together, you can do more in terms of education and outreach, providing training. That's something that, I look towards federations to do, is to provide training for their affiliates and their members, any sort of education, but also politics, frankly, is a big part of that. And coming up with some shared political priorities and, some form of a political program that meets the needs of the various affiliates inside the federation or the council, whichever it may be. That's going to be one of the biggest, task ahead, I believe. And that's something that if your state federation or your regional labor council doesn't have some, active political presence when it comes to monitoring local government, when it comes to monitoring state government, interacting with legislators and local elected officials, right? Those are all opportunities for regional federations and state federations to really get involved and to do more than just one local by itself. It's powerful when you can go to an elected official and say, hey, we represent 11 different unions, right? And these 11 different unions cover thousands of different workers across the region that do all sorts of jobs, from cooks and cashiers to rocket scientists to building trades, blue-collar workers to professional workers and everything in between. So I think education and outreach alongside, and I will say in the outreach comms and communications, putting out material and information and communicating with folks, getting information flowing from the bargaining units and the locals all the way out across to allies and vice versa, I think is really, really important as well. So, education, outreach, and politics are three that really come to mind in terms of what the federations could and should be doing to support the locals and the bargaining units.
One of the things, and folks that listen to this program know that we're intimately involved in our labor council here in North Alabama. I'm the president. Adam is a trustee, and one of the things that we would that we're doing right now is an education campaign in the local high schools, talking to them about the benefits of unions and unionism and career opportunities and some labor history, and that's a really exciting thing. And then on a horizon, one of my visions for the future is that as we start, that when one of our affiliates is bargaining a contract, that affiliate does not feel like they are bargaining a contract themselves. They feel like they are part of a labor movement that is working together on the contract negotiation and making a better life for their members and also for our community, and making a better North Alabama for everybody. And that's something that And the kind of practical and logistical and material ways that can happen is you have obviously rallies where other members of the community are coming out in support of you. You can have material support being given during a strike, for example. You can have other local unions that are intertwined in similar businesses begin aligning their contract expirations. That's something that we've seen in Minnesota, so that you do not feel pressure to cross a picket line, or even not to just cross a picket line, but to do something within that supply chain that is going to benefit the struck company, right? There are things that are done today in America that are not, quote unquote, crossing a picket line, that are still ultimately to the benefit of a company that is being struck, that union workers are doing and feel like they have to do because they are within a contract. And so aligning contracts, particularly within strategic industries, is something really important, and that can be coordinated through a labor council, and bargaining for community-wide bargaining for the public good, community-wide issues, things that will ultimately be to the benefit of people outside of that workplace as well as within it. Those are some things kind of like, if you're to bring us down from ethereally cooperation, bringing us down to like what would that actually look like, and so those are some
absolutely, and being in coalition with community and faith and nonprofit, other partners, allies,
right,
helping to build those coalitions, I think is really important as well.
Right. All right. So we have really excited for this next conversation. The Imperfect Paradise is an award-winning weekly narrative podcast showcasing California stories with universal significance, hosted by Antonia Carajito. Each deeply reported story is driven by characters who illuminate aspects of American identity and underscore California's reputation as a home for dreamers and schemers, its heartbreaking inequality, its varied and diverse communities, its unique combination of dense cities and wild places, and new episodes premiere on Wednesdays with broadcasts on LAist 89.3 the following Sunday. So this podcast is actually on the radio as well, so that's interesting. LAist Studios' Imperfect Paradise Strippers Union tells the story of a group of dancers who came together over unsafe working conditions to unionize a strip club in North Hollywood. The podcast series follows several dancers at the Star Garden Topless Dive Bar, their fight against club owners to create a new labor model for stripping and the people who got left behind along the way. We have on the line now Emma Alabaster, the lead reporter for this podcast series, and Chevelle, a worker at the Star Garden Topless Bar. Chevelle and Emma, welcome to the program. Really appreciate y'all taking the time to talk to us today.
Good. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Really glad to have you. And so, I guess so we were reached out to, by the podcast company, and so Emma, I'll start with you, and if you could, what was it that made you want to do an in-depth reported podcast series on the topic of the unionization of Star Garden? What was it about the story that popped to you that you said, this is something that I want to write about, that I want to share with people?
Sure. I have to give a shout out to my coworker, Natalie Chudnovsky, who's the senior producer of the series. She actually started the reporting process on it, and then looped me in, and I was immediately really excited. Before I worked in podcasting as an audio producer and a journalist, I am a musician, and so I have a performance background, and then I also have been involved in different kinds of movement work. And so the story really appealed to me. And I think that a lot of the way that we tell labor stories in the media can be a little flattened. And so one thing that I love about long form narrative podcasting is that we get to go deeper. And so I was really excited to get 4 episodes to go behind the headlines and get more of the story and hear directly from the dancers, like Chevelle, who unionized the club.
Right. And so, Chevelle, you are part of now one of is it 2? I think it is 2 unionized strip clubs in the entire country. So obviously we're, you probably don't know much about our program, but we're a union radio program. Both of us are union members on this program. We're on the radio, right? We're union members. I'm president of the Labor Council here in North Alabama, right? So, I think every worker deserves a union. Every worker should unionize, but not everybody does. And so far, that has not been something that has happened in the, in strip clubs across the country. It's just not been something that has been done. So, can you talk to us about, what were some of the conditions that agitated you to try to be interested in changing? But then what connected that to seeing unionization as a solution, right? Because I imagine, I know people who know strippers, and complaining about work is a pretty universal thing, right? But then going the next step and actually doing a union about it is, just factually unique. So what were the things that were agitating about the experience, and then what connected that to the solution of unionization as you saw it?
Yeah, so we were fighting for safer working conditions. Our boss was turning a blind eye to customer misconduct, and it was putting us in very threatening situations. And it came to a head after 2 of us were fired for bringing up these issues. So nobody felt safe at work. Everyone was at risk for losing their job. And so I had learned about the Lusty Lady in San Francisco and learned about unionizing many years before, and I had actually campaigned at a different club in that campaign. I mean, it never went public, so the organizing drive ended when COVID hit. But I learned a lot about it, and to me, and you would probably sympathize as a union person, that unionizing is the way to change the workplace, to fight the boss, change the workplace. And so that's why I still feel very strongly that it's a good path forward for the industry, to actually hold these bosses accountable, to get the safer working conditions we want, to get the anti-discrimination, anti-racism changes we want to the club. And of course, it's a huge fight, especially in an industry that has been the conditions have gotten worse and worse over the decades since the Lusty Lady. And we're fighting an uphill battle against employment law issues, just like there's turnover in the industry. There's like all the elements that make it difficult to organize are present in our industry. But we've been able to do a lot of cool stuff in our campaign. We even got one of our undocumented workers like a work authorization through the deferred action program. So we hope that our campaign is going to kind of light the way forward.
Yeah, wow, that's I mean, that last part in particular is really impressive, because that's not, that's a very kind of that's a pretty difficult thing to do, actually, to get an undocumented person in this country a work authorization. Was that for were you able to get that because of reporting some sort of worker or some sort of workplace malfeasance, or what were the logistically, how did that happen?
Yeah, so I think it's a relatively new program. But it's DALE, Deferred Action for a Labor something, but that's the acronym. So any kind of labor dispute, like if you file a ULP, if you have a grievance, an outstanding grievance, I believe that is also covered. But for those things, you are protected against deportation, and she received a Social Security number. So now she's working at Universal Studios theme park, like in the Harry Potter world. Like it's it's been a life changer for her. And we have a lot of undocumented workers in our industry, and through unionizing, I mean, so people are always afraid of losing their jobs. But when you unionize, like, it's supposed to be the status quo. No one's supposed to get fired. And in that process, if you've got a bunch of undocumented workers, the cool possible model is that we could bring all those people, we could get all those people's Social Security numbers. So I feel very I'm very excited for her, and excited for the possibility of like bringing more workers into, like relative safety in the job force. So I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's an exciting program for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredibly exciting. And so what were some of the first conversations that you started having around the topic of unionization, and how were you the one that started those conversations, or how did that how did that ball get rolling?
Yeah, I was actually sort of a SALT. Reagan, my coworker, came to me. I had worked at Star Garden years ago, and then I was fired for actually bringing up a issue with employment law. But so she brought me in. We had worked together at Jumbo's, trying to unionize Jumbo's before the pandemic. And then I was there for about 6 weeks, and then she was fired. Then I was, went to her and I was like, hey, I think this might be the moment. I know that you've been fired, and but I think this is like a point to rally around, because everyone was pretty devastated about it. She was bringing in really great customers. And she's just a great performer, and overall very great at her job. So everyone was shocked that she could be fired so easily, and everyone felt unsure and like was angry about it. So that was kind of a flashpoint. And then that's when I proposed in the group chat about unionizing, and just, shared a long message. This is what the process is. And there was a lot of support for it. Surprisingly, people were really down. And so then we started meeting, and it was only like 3 weeks later that we actually went like filed gave our petition to the boss. We delegated the boss. So.
Mm. And so did y'all go on strike before you actually had the successful union election, or what was, kind of chronologically, you have this this person gets fired and you bring up the idea of unionization, and eventually you do have an election, you win the union election, and my understanding is that y'all have gone on multiple strikes. And so what was that like, getting the workers there to be willing to take that action? And what was the result? Were those strikes successful?
Well, the first was actually a lockout. It was because we were picketing, it kind of became known as, we called ourselves Stripper Strike NoHo, and then in the local community, people saw us picketing and they thought, they started calling us like the Stripper Strike. But it was a lockout. We petitioned the boss, and then they, basically, they wouldn't let any of us work again. So, they put up a little red rope across the door on the first night after we delivered the petition to come back to work. So, we were locked out for, 15 months, and then we got our jobs back through the union process, and through the NLRB. So that was actually interesting because every worker is afraid of losing their job. And we all sort of lost our job for a number of months, right off the bat, but it would actually ended up being a really positive experience and brought us together. We had a super successful, strike fund. We raised money to cover rent for months. And that was by like activating our community and engaging our community. And so like the picket line became this really vibrant community space, and it connected us. The Stripper Co-op, which is our worker-owned project, that grew as a result of the strike, and we have a lot of momentum going on that side of things. So and to workers who are thinking about this and wondering if they can do it, strippers and service workers in general have such a strong connection to our customers, and those people are the ones that are supporting us in the club, and they really turned out for us during this whole process. And through the co-op, we're sustaining ourselves in a worker-owned business, directly with our customers. So it really created strengthened that connection and strengthened our community. And since then we had to go on one short ULP strike, just to kind of make a point with the NLRB. So far, we're still in the legal battle side of things, but yeah. So in terms of success, it's been a unique situation, which I'm sure you're gonna ask questions about it.
Yeah, well, actually, Emma, don't let me forget. I want to come back and I want to touch on there's something that was mentioned about some people felt some sort of way because there are there are people who work in strip clubs of all different sorts of from all sorts of backgrounds and demographics, and so this is not something that I had seen, but apparently there has been criticism or people feeling some sort of way about a group of white women unionizing while other strippers are not doing that. And so I'm interested in that criticism and how, or I don't know, it seems weird to call it a criticism, but just a lament. I'm interested in that. But before we do that, you mentioned, Chevelle, about the community and the community support. And so talk to us a little bit about that, because I could imagine that it would be I imagine that there would be lines there that you have customers and in a strip club, and you want your customers to come out and support you, but how do you keep that line from being crossed into like, kind of going into some weird territories? And then the labor movement locally, how supportive have they been? Have you seen, the labor movement in the area support it? Because, again, I could imagine, some reactions that would honestly not be great from some people in the movement. So I'm interested in both of those things, the community response as far as like folks who go to the club and how do you kind of keep those lines, and then the response and support or potentially lack thereof from the labor movement and other generally like kind of progressive organizations and communities.
Yeah, so the picket line, we called it the sidewalk strip club. So those same kind of like I guess we were performing on the sidewalk, we were dressing up. So those kind of I guess boundaries around our professional versus personal life persisted. And our regular customers were out there supporting us, and it was one of our regulars was there from start to end every night, helping us pack up, walking us to our cars. So that was really cool. And yeah, so our regulars were there for us, both supporting us financially and then also on the picket line. And the labor movement was awesome, actually. When we announced the campaign with Actors Equity, there was some pushback from Actors Equity members who were more conservative, and I think in the past Actors Equity hasn't been really a fighting union, but that's changing, which is really exciting. So we did receive some pushback within Equity, but otherwise, we were invited to speak at the Labor Notes conference just a few months after we started the campaign, and that was an incredible experience. And yeah, just the labor movement has really embraced us, and given us like a platform to talk about this, and it's been really moving and awesome.
That's great. And also big fans of Labor Notes here. We just got back from the 2024 convention. I don't know if you were able to go to that one, but we were also at the 2022 convention. So big fans of Labor Notes, and no surprise there that they've been supportive. They're great. So yeah, Emma, just zooming out a little bit, talk to us about some of the reaction from other communities to this union attempt, because just to be honest, it's difficult for me to see like that there would be a criticism, and I'm not sure like so explain to me like what's going on with that kind of narrative line through the podcast and this story as it's been developing.
Sure. So one thing I'll say is Star Garden is a really specific club, and the stripping industry, there's a lot of variety in terms of what kinds of clubs people work at and what those working conditions are like. And my understanding from talking to strippers at different clubs is that everybody wants to be paid well and to have a safe working environment. And those are issues that come up across clubs in different ways. But not everyone agrees on how to make those things happen. So some specifics about Star Garden: it's a smaller club, it's a dive bar. And there's a lot of racial segregation among strip clubs, as with many industries. So sometimes people refer to urban clubs, which are more clubs that play hip hop and have more Black dancers and Black customers, versus rock and roll clubs. I'm doing air quotes here, which are more catering to a white clientele and having more white dancers. And Star Garden is more of a rock and roll club. And a lot of the dancers I spoke to said that they experienced discriminatory hiring practices at the club. So most of the dancers were white, and there were some dancers of color, but there were no Black dancers hired under the current management. And we did reach out to the management for interviews for the podcast. They declined to talk, but we did speak with their lawyer. And so some of her answers are in the podcast as well. But so that was one issue at the club. And so then when the dancers went on strike, they were a mostly white group. And they got a lot of media attention, right? And that's part of what the podcast is doing as well. And I think there were other dancers who had been organizing in different ways for a long time. So there's one dancer we speak to in the podcast whose name is Kat Hollis. And Kat started a movement in Portland, Oregon called PDX Stripper Strike. And that was inspired by NYC Stripper Strike. And so these strikes were not strikes in a traditional labor movement sense in terms of like a work stoppage, but were more so about movements putting pressure on clubs across their respective cities to call for an end to discriminatory hiring practices and colorism and issues like that in the clubs. And they were using the word strike to, I think, refer to more of a labor strike, but also to talk about like fighting back and like a blow. And so I think one thing that happened is, as Chevelle said, because when the dancers at Star Garden went on strike, they were referring to themselves as NoHo, as in North Hollywood Stripper Strike. Some dancers thought that that was appropriative of this more Black-led movement of these stripper strikes that had been popping up across the country. So that was one issue that came up. And then the other issue that we dive into in the show is especially in California, there's a lot of tension about independent contractor versus employee status. There was a law that was passed in 2020 in California called AB 5, also known as the Gig Workers Bill, and it was meant to target rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft. And, these companies that, as we know, there's a rise in gig work across the country, and there are all these companies that are essentially treating workers as employees, but paying them as independent contractors. And this law passed in California that pretty much overnight turned a lot of contract workers into employees. And that included strip clubs. And so the way that strip clubs responded to this law, differed from club to club, but it seems like a lot of clubs, fired a lot of their workers because they thought that they couldn't afford to keep as many people on if they had to pay them as employees. And who was fired? Some dancers we spoke to said that a lot of the more marginalized workers were fired. So dancers of color, disabled dancers, trans and gender nonconforming dancers like that. And then there were other ways that clubs responded to this law that made working conditions a lot worse for a lot of dancers. So we speak to one dancer in particular on the podcast, Onyx Black, who has an organization called Artist Revolt, and she's been organizing against AB 5 to either get a carve out for strip clubs or to get it repealed completely. It's complicated because across the country, even in states that don't have AB 5, there are dancers who have sued their clubs, and most of the time it is ruled that they were being misclassified. In other words, they're being treated as employees even if they're being paid as contractors. So across the board, most clubs probably are treating their dancers as employees, whether or not they're paying them that way. And as you all probably know, it's easier to unionize if you're an employee, right? And so that's part of how these two conversations about unionizing a club versus this particular law come head to head. And so, I think one thing that's particular about the stripping industry, like other kinds of service industries, is that it does draw a lot of marginalized workers who need money quickly, who want to be able to make their own hours or come in and out of work or work at multiple places. And, as we're hearing from Chevelle, also like unionizing is often a lot of work and takes a lot of time. Those dancers were, on the sidewalk outside of the club for 15 months, and the struggle is continued even after getting the union. And so I think it's a real investment. And obviously, marginalized workers across industries make that investment in having a union campaign. But to me, as someone who I personally was raised in a very pro-labor background, I was really surprised to hear marginalized workers really critiquing this strategy of pushing for a union. And to me, it really highlighted the issues in this country with the ways that our rights are so often tied to our workplaces. Um, and, for example, we spoke to a researcher named Alana Turner, who does research specifically on strippers in California and their reactions to AB5. And she said she would ask people, well, don't you want healthcare? And they'd say, yeah, I want healthcare. I just don't want it tied to the club that I work at. And so I think, unionizing might allow workers to, in theory, be able to get healthcare from their club, but then it makes them feel like they are also stuck at that workplace when they might want to work there more short term, or they might want to work at several clubs. And so I think, those are some of the tensions that we explore within the show.
Interesting. So, Chevelle, how have y'all, kind of responded to these tensions and explored them? And then also I'm wondering if, so the trade unions have a really interesting model that is very different from industrial unions, where you have a group of workers and the boss decides who is hired, and then you and then you unionize, or you don't in some cases. And so my union is like the latter, right? I am a worker in a workplace. I was hired by my boss, and there's a union there, and so I join the union, and I get my health care through the employer and all of this stuff. But the building trades, their signatory contractors are, they represent the contractors' workers, but really what happens is the contractors give the building trades unions a call, and they say, hey, I need 50 iron workers, 100 electrical workers, 20 bricklayers, and 10, whatever, right? And then they fill the call, and they get their health care their pension and all that through the union, and all the contractors, the businesses, they put into the fund per hour worked for the pension and the healthcare and everything like that. So I'm wondering if has there been any conversation about, like, maybe that's kind of a model that the unions in our industry could utilize if there is a concern about the healthcare being tied to a single employer, or just. And I know that you're exploring the worker cooperative model, and so maybe that's kind of the answer that you've come to. But yeah, how are y'all at Star Garden exploring these tensions and working them out?
Well, yeah. So the signatory, what you bring up about that is really interesting. Actors Equity does work on more of, when there is union density, more of like that SAG-AFTRA kind of thing, where they bargain contracts with industry wide, and then you can go to club. So that would be ultimately an end goal, an exciting one. I wanted to talk about the employee versus an independent contractor status, because there is still a lot of, so when AB5 passed, first of all, we were independent contractors at Star Garden. And our employer offered us 2 contracts. They said, you can be an employee and you can earn minimum wage, but then we're going to give you a dance quota, and we're going to take all your dance money for the first $200 that you sell. Or you can be an independent contractor and you can keep 50% of your dances from the get-go. So when people talk about AB5 being strip clubs in California, I really look at clubs piggybacked on the Uber and Lyft narrative about, this is going to take away your schedule flexibility. This is going to, change everything for the worse. And it's true that clubs, when they changed to AB5, they fired a lot of their marginalized dancers. But for me, that's squarely on the shoulders of the bosses. They made this decision to implement the law the way that they did, and they did it because they were doing it because they wanted to whitewash their clubs. They wanted to put in these dance quotas, and they wanted to make more money off of the dancers, and that's what's happened. But it's not because of AB5, in my view. It's because they took this opportunity as like a cash grab, and they wanted to whitewash their clubs. Because a lot of clubs in California still operate on independent contractor status. So there is no enforcement that these clubs are running from. So that's my view of it, and that's why I think that organizing, how we're going to have to ultimately hold these bosses accountable. And any dancer in the U.S., as far as the NLRB, can unionize. So it's not that if you are considered an employee at your club, it's like that door is open to you. Actually, federally, that door is open to you whether or not your state employment law calls you an employee. As far as we've seen, and the NLRB, it wasn't even like a big issue when we had our union campaign. It was sort of like checking the boxes. It's like, so it wasn't something we were ever worried about in terms of NLRB seeing us as employees. So just to kind of like address that, because that the reporting around employment status and journalists kind of being focusing on that issue has been a little bit frustrating for me because of the way that federal law and employment law, like labor law and employment law, does and doesn't interact. But anyway, so with when we do get union density, that would be really cool to have. You would have the flexibility, different clubs, provided you always have to bargain a contract, and that's the hard stage that we're in now. But we are also facing a boss that is really fighting us tooth and nail, and is sort of like a worst case scenario boss. He doesn't care about his business. He's trashed it in order to try to bust the union. So if your boss cares about your club and wants to make money off of your club and is making a living off of your club, you have a lot more leverage than in our case, where our boss has a bunch of real estate holdings and is probably, the club is probably a front for some kind of criminal money laundering or something. So we're not working under like, and this is why worker ownership is so important, because in these, and it's not uncommon in the industry that this is the case. And so we really need to be ready to take over these clubs. And I'm not saying that was not the goal going into this. We wanted a union contract. But if the boss is willing to shut down the club or go into bankruptcy or something because they can, and they don't, they just care that much about not working with the union, we need to have a strategy to be able to, either transition into a club where the workforce is worker owned if it's not at that location, or strategize to actually assume the business to carry on the union.
Right. Well, I saw Emma have a look, so maybe we're going to be getting some follow-up investigation on is Star Garden a criminal front? So I'll be looking for that reporting from Emma.
I don't know about that, but that's the first I'd heard that theory.
So that's primarily, Chevelle, been the conversation about worker ownership, is that if this employer is willing to drive it into the ground, that's kind of what we we're thinking about this as a strategy to combat that.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Is there anything else, Chevelle, that you think folks here ought to know, actually? And somebody brought this up in our chat, but a couple of weeks ago, actually, like 2 or 3 weeks ago in Birmingham, dancers filed a lawsuit at a strip club. Birmingham's just like an hour and a half south of here, for $100,000 in stolen wages, house fees, and other labor violations. Is there anything that you would say to our audience here in Alabama, Louisiana, and Kentucky about y'all's campaign, and any lessons that folks who work in strip clubs can take, and folks who work in other industries can take from what y'all are going through?
Yeah, and actually I actually sued Star Garden after I was fired the first time for like wage and hour violations. And that's something that strippers do a lot, and they win, like Emma was saying. But the frustration there is that these lawsuits don't get your job back, and they don't often change the club because these clubs actually budget to settle these lawsuits, and then they carry on business as usual. So anywho, I'm glad that those workers are taking action, and just to kind of put that in context. And yeah, I also didn't get a chance to follow up about the criticism that we received. And I do regret using the stripper strike name. I think that was a mistake, and we're sorry for that. And we did our best to try to highlight those different movements, but we could have done more. And I also learned through the podcast about the Kat Hollis's strategy of really focusing on mutual aid. And that is super important for marginalized workers who want to participate in these kind of movements, and it's foundational. So I really applaud the work that they're doing up there. And yeah, as far as takeaways, I think just using our power as service workers, that connection with our customers, building community, and really, when you're talking about a transformation of society in a move towards socialism or anarchism, or whatever, it's going to be grounded in community. And so I think that's really the biggest takeaway for me is that we have, within the strip club, if you remove the boss, it's us and it's our customers. And since the strip club isn't paying us anyway, that's really what it is anyway. So, like, we want to change our clubs and we want to get those good contracts. But, our community will really sustain us in or out of the club. So, and we already have that. So that's an exciting thing to kind of take away, I think.
And Emma, was there anything else that you wanted to make sure that you left our listeners with? Anything that maybe surprised you in your reporting, or any other lessons or pieces of information that you felt would be important for folks to know?
Yeah, I'll give one more plug for the podcast. I think we're able to get more deep into some of the backstory of what led to the unionization. We get to meet a bunch of the different dancers that were involved in that, and hear about the really supportive community that was built even before Chevelle sent that first text, right? Suggesting that folks unionize, that kind of built the foundation that people were able to organize on top of. I also think it's really, notable that Chevelle said that she tried to unionize on another club previously that originally hadn't been reported on. And I think that was not surprising to me as someone who has organizing background, right? A lot of the time you have to have failed campaigns before you can win one. There's a lot of, I think, lessons that can be learned by other dancers, but also by anyone in any industry. I mean, I remember when the dancer Reagan was doing an interview, our recording engineer saying, "Oh my God, the whole time I was listening, this reminded me so much of experiences I had working in recording studios," right? There are specifics of the strip club environment, but I think a lot of the issues are relatable across industries and applicable across industries. I think it is really interesting in terms of a story about an industry that has really little union density and the sort of possibilities and also limits of what that means. In episode 3, we get to hear about what the opening night was like at Star Garden when it reopened as a union strip club, and all of the hijinks that ensued there, which included chanting and union songs from the stage. That is a night I will never forget. And then in episode 4, we explore more of this worker-owned cooperative model, and get to hear a little bit about what Chevelle and some Star Garden dancers and other dancers have been building there, and what they're hoping for, and how worker cooperatives work in general. So I hope folks will give a listen. It came out in February, so if you look back in the Imperfect Paradise feed, wherever you get your podcasts, you'll be able to find Strippers Union.
Fantastic. Emma Alabaster, Chevelle. The podcast is Imperfect Paradise. There's a 4-part series on the strippers unions in North Hollywood at Star Garden. Thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So we got a couple of other things that we wanted to talk about on the program today. And one of those is a clip from a Trump rally in Michigan, where he opened his his rally in Michigan. Is probably not a great way to open a rally in Michigan, by attacking UAW's international president, Shawn Fain. Let's take a listen to this.
United Auto Workers, I just want to tell you, the head of the United Auto Workers has really let you down. To agree with that whole situation that they just did, that's so good for China, and it's so bad for Michigan.
So there you go. That was a relatively short clip because that's basically all he said about the UAW. He goes on to talk about Joe Biden and electric car mandates and things like this. But eagle-eared listeners will note that there was not just a whole lot of reaction, even during that short clip. And I listened to some of the rest of the rally, and it was all punctuated all throughout with applause and hooting and hollering and on all of this stuff. People really excited. And so I thought it was really interesting that as he, attacks the most prominent labor leader in the United States, in Michigan, they're totally silent. Just completely, there is no reaction at all from the crowd. And it's such a short clip that I'm going to play again, and this time I want you to listen to not just his comments, and we'll talk about those, but the reaction or lack thereof from the crowd. Listen to this.
United Auto Workers, I just want to tell you, the head of the United Auto Workers has really let you down. To agree with that whole situation that they just did, that's so good for China, and it's so bad for Michigan.
There you go. Do you agree with that? He asks, and nobody responds. So that's a pretty interesting, little tidbit there from his rally. It's kind of reminiscent of when he was in Coleman, and he was talking about how the vaccine has been beneficial and saved a lot of lives, and he actually got booed. I don't know how many people remember that, but he was at a rally in Coleman, Alabama, and he was booed by the crowd for saying that the vaccine was beneficial and not bad and did not kill people. That elicited boos from his crowd. So there's kind of a cult thing going on with Trump supporters, but there is a little bit of an independent streak related to some topics, and it's interesting that one of those topics might be the UAW and whether it is actually bad for Michigan. And so that's what he said about the UAW, that that situation was bad for Michigan. So it's not clear exactly what he was talking about with that situation, because when people just say that situation in relation to the UAW, I think primarily they're going to be thinking about the Big Three strike in 2023, at the end of 2023, right? And so like you just say the situation with the UAW, that's going to be the first thing that comes to your mind, right, is the strike. And obviously that was not bad for Michigan. That was very good for Michigan, actually. That's going to be bringing in hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars more from these companies into the local economies by virtue of it being paid to the workers rather than being sucked up by stockholders and shareholders and everything like that. So obviously that is going to be very good for Michigan. Another thing, that people might be thinking of with that situation about the UAW would be the current campaign to organize the non-union auto sector in the South. And again, obviously very good for Michigan if you take labor out of competition and you're not having investment decisions being made primarily or in large part based on which state is willing to exploit their workers the most. Right? It is just good for Michigan if that's not the way that these decisions are being made, in the same way that it's good for Alabama if that's not the same way, if that's not the way that these decisions are being made. So, he goes on to talk about electric vehicles, and so perhaps he is, talking about the UAW's support for a just transition, although that was not clear in those comments, obviously, the isolated comments about the UAW. But he could have been talking about that. But, the UAW's position on a just transition is that it should happen because climate change is real and it's important to combat that to the extent that we can. But, the UAW is not making these investment decisions by the auto companies. They're not the ones that are driving these decisions. In fact, nowhere in the contract that they just won do they have any say over these decisions about what to make, what kind of cars they're going to be making, right? And so the UAW's position has primarily been, if this is going to happen, and it should, we think it should, but if this is going to happen, workers should be making good wages. It should be good union wages, healthcare, retirements, things like this. There should not be a second tier of employment in the auto industry snuck in through the manufacturing of electric vehicles and car batteries. That's been the primary UAW position. So again, obviously good for Michigan, the UAW stance on electric vehicles. And it seems like the crowd agrees. So I thought that was interesting and worth pointing out to people. Another story out of Boeing. This one out of Boeing, where, folks have been seeing in the news, no doubt, all of these, issues with build quality of these jets, pieces, literally falling apart in the sky, some of these 737s. And so obviously, very concerning, this kind of stuff. And it is all of these problems are derivative of the corporate greed that we see in the United States, where the pursuit of profit is, the pursuit of profit pushes corporations like Boeing to cut costs both in terms of labor, but also in terms of, safety, in terms of quality assurance. And there have been multiple people coming out now with stories and testimonies about how they and other people have come forward at Boeing and at Boeing subcontractors like Spirit Aerospace or Spirit Aerosystems, and telling management there are safety issues with the products that we are putting out. We need to correct some of these things because there is a huge error rate in the production of this piece or that piece, right? And there's and the stories have been, we're coming to management with this, and management is not doing anything about it, and then retaliating against me for coming and bringing these things to management. One of those people was Joshua Dean, a former quality auditor at a key Boeing supplier. I'm reading this from NPR. Joshua Dean, a former quality auditor at a key Boeing supplier, who raised concerns about improperly drilled holes in the fuselage of 737 MAX jets. That's, you're drilling holes in the fuselage of these enormous jets. You want them to be properly drilled. That's my controversial opinion. I want properly drilled holes in fuselages of 737 MAX jets. That's my controversial take. And that was also the take of Joshua Dean. Well, Joshua Dean has died. He died earlier this week on Tuesday morning at the age of 45. His family announced on social media. His family told NPR on Thursday that Dean had quickly fallen ill fallen into critical condition after being diagnosed with an MRSA bacterial infection. He was airlifted from a hospital in Wichita, Kansas, to another facility in Oklahoma City, but medical teams were unable to save his life. And this is, really strange. This is strange because Dean's mother and stepfather both described him as, quote, studious and a, quote, health nut who rarely drank and attended church regularly. His career was helped by his prodigious memory and attention to detail, his family said. So, this is not a sickly person. This is not an old person. This is a person who's 45 years old and is reported to have been a health nut who came down with some bacterial infection and ultimately died out of nowhere. His mother said he started feeling sick about 2 weeks ago, stayed home from work for a couple of days, but then things got worse. Got a call, his mother said, got a call from him that he was really sick and having trouble breathing. So then he went to immediate care, and they told him that he had strep throat. So then, when his mother went to check on her son at his home, he said, call me. His mother said, call me if you feel worse. And he said, and then his mother said, he called me a couple of hours later and told me he was in the emergency room and that he was scared because they found something on his lungs. From his mother again, he tested positive for influenza B. He tested positive for MRSA. He had pneumonia. His lungs were completely filled up. And from there, he just went downhill. Very strange, a stunning turn of events, NPR says, for Dean and his family. Green says he was very healthy, someone who went to the gym. Green is his mother. Green says he was very healthy, someone who went to the gym, ran nearly every day, and was very careful about his diet. But within days, his kidneys gave out, and he was relying on an ECMO life support machine to do the work of his heart and lungs. So just a very strange thing, as of this moment, there are no allegations or evidence to suggest that that there was foul play involved. But other than the fact that this is the second Boeing whistleblower to have died in the last month. There was another one that died about a month ago. The first one was, let's see, what was the, having trouble remembering the first whistleblower's name that died. But again, it's just, that's bonkers. And, if Boeing did not kill these people, then it's very unfortunate that these coincidences happened for Boeing, because this really does not look good. Really looks sketchy. Dean was one of the first to flag some of those potentially defects, dangerous defects that I was talking about, improperly drilled holes in fuselages. The first one was John Barnett, 62, from what appears to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. You may remember that somebody came out and said that Josh Barnett told them that he is not going to kill himself only days before he allegedly killed himself. So again, very suspicious and strange things happening there. That's just something else that I wanted to pass on to you. There are some layoffs going on at Boeing in Huntsville, not affecting the union side of the business. I asked somebody at Boeing if this was related to any of their folks. The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 2766, represents workers at Boeing in Huntsville. And somebody from that union said that it's a different shop, and all the people that are being laid off are salary. And there is going to be an attempt to move them, to relocate them to other areas, so that hopefully they don't have to lose their jobs if they don't have something to fall back on here in Huntsville. So Not great stuff happening for Boeing in the news. Really, really not good stuff. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That phone number is 844-899-8857 if you want to call in, if you have a comment or a question about anything that we've talked about during the show today, or if you have a question about something else. I did want to make sure that we talked about what's going on college campuses across the country, because across the country, students and workers, it's important to recognize that a lot of these people involved in these protests are actually workers at the college campuses. They're not just students, they're workers. On college campuses across the country, students and workers are standing up against their universities' complicities in the atrocities being committed in Gaza by Israel. And there's an attempt to smear these people as anti-Semitic, to smear the thrust of the movement as anti-Semitic, as pro-terrorist, as anti-American. And I find this so frustrating because, just for one, just as a matter of statistics, of course, in any group of people, you're going to find bigotry, right? So there very well may be discrete examples of anti-Semitism in some of the encampments. Although, to be completely honest, I have not seen one. I've seen allegations and I have seen incidents that people are pointing to as anti-Semitic, but the supposedly offending actions have always simply been criticisms of Israel's actions or of Zionism as an ideology, and resistance against agitators who are trying to go around and harass anti-war demonstrators. Those are all the things. I have seen allegations of anti-Semitism, and I have seen incidents that people point to as anti-Semitic, but they have all not been actually anti-Semitic. And the use of anti-Semitism as a cudgel in these instances that I have seen have all been totally cynical and really pretty gross to use the legacy of anti-Semitism as a weapon to push for war, to push for killing, to push for the destruction of entire civilization and a people. Really gross, really gross. Now, has there been radical rhetoric and actions that I've disagreed with that I've seen in these protests and in these encampments? Of course, but there's not been anything that I've seen that's been motivated by bigotry. And in any protest, you are going to get people on a radical edge saying and doing weird shit, right? I mean, that's just what is going to happen in any protest. But the thrust of these encampments and what they're doing, peacefully occupying green spaces on their universities. Again, this is not, these are not violent. These are peaceful demonstrations on university campuses. What they're asking for, the thrust of these demonstrations, is for Israel to end its assault on Palestinians and for our institutions in the United States to cut off support for these actions. That thrust of this movement is obviously correct in exactly the same way that anti-war protesters were correct with respect to Vietnam and Iraq, and in exactly the same way that anti-apartheid demonstrators were correct with respect to the U.S. South and South Africa. Obviously, in any of those movements as well, there were discrete incidents of in any of those movements, there are going to be discrete incidents of actions that would be condemnable or inadvisable. And the media of the day did exactly the same thing that media is doing today to manufacture consent against the cause of the protesters, again, as the media is doing today about these protests. In the 60s, for example, during the sit-ins, which were, by the way, actually occupations of private businesses that literally interfered with commerce, right? If you were in one of these places where protesters were sitting in, you were not able to engage in the commerce and the private business activity that you would normally have been able to engage in. As opposed to today, these occupations of green spaces on public universities, where the First Amendment is in full effect, that do not even interfere with students' ability to get to class, much less interfere with private commerce, right? So that's, pretty radical differences here in that what's happening on college campuses today is actually much less radical than what was happening in the fight against Jim Crow in the U.S. South. During the sit-ins, the majority of the American public was opposed. They thought that the sit-ins and anti-Jim Crow demonstrations were actually, quote, doing more harm than good for the Negro. When MLK was assassinated, he was one of the most unpopular people in America. Extremely unpopular among white Americans. The Vietnam and Iraq protesters were literally tarred with the exact same names as the protesters today: anti-American, pro-terrorist, etc. And yet, now, the folks in all of those movements are studied and remembered as they rightly should have been regarded in their day, heroic and on the right side of history. And that's exactly how the people who are protesting today are going to be remembered 20 and 30 years out. They were doing the right thing, they were on the right side of history, and they were more brave and, in doing things that everybody else, everybody else should have been doing something. And they were doing more than most people. That's how folks in the anti-Vietnam, anti-Iraq, anti-South Africa, and anti-Jim Crow protests are remembered today. That's how the pro-Palestinian demonstrators are going to be remembered in 20 or 30 years. But it is still unfortunate that today, in the reality that we live in, they are not regarded that way. They are being tarred as pro-terrorist, anti-American, evil, wicked, etc., etc. And people who are saying this in the media, by and large, are lying. They don't believe it. They don't actually believe that these demonstrations are quote-unquote pro-Hamas. They don't actually believe that these are anti-Semitic. It's all cynical. It's all people lying. They don't believe it. It's also worth mentioning that, while maybe or maybe not there have been discrete incidents of bigotry among pro-Palestinian protesters, there has been a pattern of violence against these peaceful demonstrations, both by police and by pro-Israel counter-demonstrators. In one incident, a 65-year-old former head of Jewish studies, that's right, a former head of Jewish studies was assaulted by the police. In other incidences, pro-Israel demonstrators were yelling the N-word. At Ole Miss, pro-Israel demonstrator, with the approval of an entire crowd of people around him, was dancing like a monkey and making monkey noises at a black woman who was pro-Palestinian. I mean, these are the kind of people that the Democrats are siding with. Right? I mean, that's the people that Joe Biden right now is in coalition with as he supports the far right in Israel in carrying out the destruction of Gaza. He is in coalition with racist frat boys in Mississippi who are dancing like a monkey, taunting pro-Palestine demonstrators. He is in coalition with people who are assaulting 65-year-old Jewish women. He is in coalition with people who are yelling the N-word. That's the people that he is in coalition with right now as he's carrying out this, supporting the destruction of Gaza by Israel. Unlike some of these other times in American history where unions have had a mixed record at best, the record of the labor movement during the civil rights movement, was probably net positive, but on Vietnam, on Iraq, not net positive, certainly. On the South Africa protest, it was probably a net positive. But so far, the labor movement has been much more universally or much more decidedly on the side of the Palestinian protesters, which is good. And in particular, against their abuse and violence against these protesters. Unions standing against this include the Communication Workers of America, CWA, who put out the following statement. Couple of things from that statement. Over the past few weeks, attacks against students, journalists, and workers who have been engaging in and reporting on peaceful protest against Israel's siege on Gaza have escalated. Corporations are firing workers for speaking up. Police have arrested and brutally attacked student protesters. Journalists covering these events have been attacked and detained, and campus workers are facing retaliation and attacks from institutions whose core values should include academic freedom and peaceful assembly. The Communication Workers of America represents journalists, Google workers, and thousands of campus workers, including students across the country. We are outraged and disturbed by the use of force on our CWA members and other students, campus staff and faculty, community members, and journalists at these peaceful protests. We condemn Google's illegal termination of workers, including some AWU-CWA members who raised concerns about the company's contracts with the Israeli military. We believe that the fundamental right to freedom of speech and assembly is essential to maintain in any democracy, and is one important way union members and other activists have changed the tides of history. Over the past 7 years, 43 states have enacted anti-protest legislation. The extreme, repressive response to these protests is part of an alarming push by institutions to limit free speech. We reaffirm our call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and are proud to stand in solidarity with our members and all students standing up for peace and justice. And this last point that they made about the freedom of speech is really interesting, because we have seen by and large, the people who have actually made a big stink about campus free speech specifically come out in favor of the repression of these protests, in favor of violence against people in these peaceful encampments who are not interfering with people's, even with people's ability to go to class, much less interfering in their private commerce. So, it's just worth noting the next time that these people come out in support of freedom of speech, that this, much like their claims that these protests are anti-Semitic, is completely cynical. They do not care about free speech, in particular on college campuses. The National Nurses Union, National Nurses United, came out with a statement as well, saying that our union stands in solidarity with student and faculty protesters at campuses across the United States facing a violent crackdown for speaking out against the mass killings and public health catastrophe in Gaza. Amid the ongoing Israeli military campaign that has killed, injured, and displaced tens of thousands of Gazan civilians, nurses remain steadfast in our belief in the human rights to health, safety, free speech, collective action, and protest. NNU has called for and still calls for a permanent and lasting ceasefire in Gaza and the swift delivery of humanitarian aid in Palestine. Nurses condemn the decisions made by university administrators to respond to protests with police violence, intimidation, and repression. The rapid deployment of state-sanctioned violent force in response to these peaceful protests is an incredibly troubling sign of how these administrators respond to collective action and protest, which are essential for the exercise of free speech rights and labor rights on campuses and all workplaces, especially in a political atmosphere of broader, increasingly anti-democratic authoritarianism. Union nurses know the importance of collective action and protest, which have been fundamental to the trade union movement and to all struggles for justice throughout history. We condemn any efforts to criminalize or restrict these protests. Violent crackdowns to suppress protected free speech are at odds with nurses' value to speak up and speak out when something is wrong and people are hurting or dying because of it. Nurses in the United States continue to mourn the lives lost to this violence during and since October 7th, and we condemn anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and all forms of bigotry on college campuses, in our hospitals, and in our communities. As nurses and as a union, NNU calls for an immediate ceasefire, delivery of humanitarian aid, release of all hostages, and an end to this violence. We urge all parties to protect human life and the health and well-being of civilians in both Israel and Palestine. And that one is worth, that's the point about the ceasefire in Gaza. There are attempts to make it seem as if Israel is willing to enact a ceasefire, but it is Hamas that is stopping this. And this is obviously not the case. Hamas has put on the table for months a hostages for ceasefire deal. Now, is that, should Hamas surrender without conditions? Sure. Should they give the hostages back without conditions? Sure. But politically speaking, it is just not true that if the hostages were returned, the war would be over. In fact, just yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu expressly rejected that offer. expressly rejected it. SEIU is another union that put out a statement. SEIU represents nearly 100,000 educators, graduate student employees, professional and support and contract staff who work at colleges and universities across the nation. We are workers who help make colleges and universities run. We are faculty, administrative staff, graduate workers, resident assistants, librarians, cafeteria workers, janitorial staff, maintenance crew, and others who play critical roles in educating and supporting campus communities and providing safe and clean campuses. The suppression of free speech sets a dangerous precedent for all who seek justice, whether it's students calling for institutional accountability or workers organizing for better conditions on the job. As campuses around the United States are erupting in protest over the horrors and injustice Palestinians are facing, SEIU proudly stands in solidarity with the students, faculty, and staff exercising their right to speak up. We condemn the silencing of democratic protests on college campuses, just as we condemn anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and hatred in all its forms. The UAW has been particularly good on this issue. With the UAW local representing UCLA workers getting ready to authorize a strike. This was their region's statement on the issue. Over the last 2 days, the UCLA administration has condoned the brutal attack of students and workers as they peacefully protested for justice in Palestine. Rather than negotiating with the protesters and de-escalating, UCLA administration's actions have caused dozens to seek medical attention and hospitalizations, a militarized police presence on campus, and the arrest of more than 130 students and workers, including UAW 4811 members. As a former teaching assistant, reader, and tutor at UCLA, I am outraged by the administration's actions. This is from UAW Region 6 Director Mike Smith? Mike Miller, sorry. UAW 4811 members have taken swift action to respond, working alongside thousands of other students and workers at UCLA to mobilize for free speech and safety on campus and to demand justice for Palestine. Today, UAW 4811 members are preparing to file unfair labor practice charges over UC's actions and are moving towards a strike authorization vote. This comes less than a week after UAW 872 members at University of Southern California also filed an unfair labor practice over similar failures by the USC administration. As Local 4811 members move towards a strike authorization vote, we know that you have the full support of your Region 6 siblings across the West Coast and your UAW siblings across the continent as you stand up for your rights and give voice to those impacted by the war in Gaza. Our union has taken a clear stance calling for a permanent ceasefire and justice in Palestine, and I am proud to work alongside my fellow International Executive Board members and UAW members across the country to continue escalating the call for a ceasefire and an end to the death, destruction, and human suffering in Palestine. UAW members across the country are prepared to do what it takes to win justice for working people across the world and to secure a permanent ceasefire in Palestine. I am immensely proud of the actions members across Region 6 have taken for months to fight for peace and justice in Gaza and to demand action from their employers and elected officials alike. As Brother Shawn Fain said so well yesterday, if you can't take the outcry, stop supporting this war. And that's the other angle to this, is the political angle. We've seen Democratic operatives flail, saying that demonstrators are going to re-elect Trump, including the number 2 Democrat in Alabama, Tabitha Eisner. She said on Twitter that this is how you get Trump, referring to UA protests. And, you know, that's just particularly gross because Tabitha was only elected because socialists who were at the UA protests organized enough people to get onto the Democratic Executive Committee for the state to elect her to that position. So really gross that she's coming out and smearing these activists, saying that they're going to be electing Trump. Because obviously that is not true. It will be Biden who will re-elect Trump if this issue is the issue that the election turns on, because Biden's actions have obvious and predictable consequences, which is that young people will oppose the war. This is not something that is strange or unpredictable. It is, in fact, very predictable, and that is what is happening. So, the idea that you would be looking at individual students on college campuses and saying that they are responsible for the re-election of Donald Trump because they protested the actions of Biden, instead of looking at the Biden administration and saying that they are responsible for provoking this outcry by supporting the mass killing of civilians in Palestine with our tax dollars, is the most lib shit I have ever seen in my life. And it is absurd and it is gross. It is gross. Responsibility obviously lies with Biden, and Shawn Fain had some words of wisdom. This war is wrong, and this response against students and academic workers, many of them UAW members, is wrong. We call on the powers that be to release the students and employees who have been arrested, and if you can't take the outcry, stop supporting this war. That's pretty simple. Pretty simple, not complicated, obvious political point. So went a little long on that, but wanted to make sure that we got to that. So we'll probably be talking about Dan Osborne next week, but just to preview a little bit of the conversation, he doubled the fundraising of U.S. Senator Deb Fischer, who is the GOP incumbent in Nebraska. He is running against her as an independent, and he raised in the last cycle $200,000, mostly from small dollar donors, whereas Deb Fischer has only raised $100,000 in the last cycle, primarily from big donors and corporate interests. So that's really interesting. Another poll, that poll came out a while back showing that he was leading her in the race. So we'll see what happens. And the labor movement will really should be backing him, really going to the wall for him, because that's a pickup opportunity that I do not believe was anticipated. So. But that's going to be it for us this week, folks. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Y'all have a good rest of your day. TVLR.fm is where you can find us. You can donate to the program at TVLR.fm/donate. You can buy our merch at TVLR.fm/store, where we have new hats. Our logo caps, it's a black cap. You've seen me wear it on the program. It's a good hat. Union made, USA, obviously. So yeah. Y'all have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.